Okay, thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. Full board except for Mr. Cronin. If anyone's recording, would they make it known? Thanks. If there's anyone here this evening regarding the continued public hearing for MMDD JSAK, this is a special permit site plan and a subdivision plan on Patterson Brook Road. They've asked to withdraw their plan, so if you're here for that plan this evening, you don't have to hang around. First item up on the agenda is the minutes for August 28th.
Pardon? I guess they didn't give you a reason for withdrawal. Should know what that is.
From one idea to another.
We jump from
Form C.
Form C to wall space for lighting.
I don't know, I guess I'd have to see what was discussed previously. And maybe he was following through with the,
I remember making the comment, but it just seemed out of context.
yeah, responding to a number of different points being made.
Minor point.
You can approve it with changes. You can approve it with changes.
Thank you.
Any action to be had on the minutes of August 28th?
Mr. Chairman, minor point on page 3, middle of the page. I'd like to ask that it read that the applicant look into turning the smaller building 90 degrees rather than both.
And it should say moves to continue the hearing to November 11th, correct? Anything else?
Someone made a motion.
Want to accept?
Motion to accept as corrected.
Yes.
Second.
Discussion? None, all in favor? There were, I believe, 3 of us
Right.
here that were there that evening. Yep, and 3 of us.
Just,
All in favor?
just the three. Aye.
Opposed? And 2 abstentions?
Two.
Oh, yeah. I think to keep things moving, go into the public hearing for the town meeting articles, the recodification of the bylaws and technical amendments. Want to do these one at a time? I take it?
Yeah, we can do them one at a time. I have the articles on the computer. I can project it and we can look at it, the content together if you, as needed in this piece. I just wanted to go over the history. The Zoning Study Committee was created in the fall of 2016. They prepared work that was brought forward in the spring of 2017 with the promise that town meeting would get additional information, ideas for adoption in the fall town meeting. And that's what this is. It's a recodification and renumbering of the zoning bylaw and technical amendments, small changes that were made to correct errors and omissions in the original bylaws. There were changes that were made previously and not included in the zoning bylaw that we discovered in the course of going through the history of the bylaw changes. And those changes are made without reference to this newest article. These are changes that we found that would help people better understand the zoning bylaw, hopefully, and correct those errors and omissions from previous drafting of the zoning bylaws. So what we did, based on recommendation by town council, was to go through and identify all the individual items of changes that were being made. And what I can do is I'll go to the slideshow.
Can we shut the lights off, please?
You need the lights off?
Just, one over the screen.
Just the one side. Thanks, Joe.
Can I see that letter for a minute, the GAF letter? Thank you.
As an example of the changes.
What was that, Bob?
Please hand use the mic.
I'll try to get it closer.
Thank you.
As an example of the changes, we've highlighted in yellow some of the changes that have been made for the text. As an example, principal being spelled correctly was one of the changes that was done throughout the document.
could you have multiple principal uses?
That's the purpose for that particular section. We can talk about the content and what changes you think should be occurring in there as the next step. I think we should have that discussion for Springtown meeting as to what we bring forward in the next round of town meeting. Highlight another change in the zoning table, the use regulations. As you may recall, there are blanks in the table. The interpretation of the previous building commissioners have been, and the current building commissioner has been, that if it's blank, it means it's prohibited. It's not an allowed use. And so what we're doing is we're clarifying that, because it's always the question that comes up for somebody new looking at the zoning bylaw as to what the intent is. We're taking out, in this case, also manufactured home, because that has been superseded by the state law. As you can see, there are small changes, such as the hospital and hospital-connected facility is now medical-related facility, and a clarification that in the 2008 town meeting, in the fall town meeting, I believe, the medical-related facilities in the CG, General Commercial Zoning District, was changed from a no, prohibited, to a yes, allowed as of right. Again, some of the blank spaces that were filled in with no's.
Is it the intent to just fill in those spaces, or are you open to changing, at this point, changing some of these to yes, or?
Well, that wasn't the intent of this particular time. This particular effort was just to make corrections in the zoning bylaw that for those omissions or what seemed to be problems that had been included previously.
It's okay, George. The drive-through non-food establishments, I think we have an issue that we need to clear up as well. If you look at what our definition is for a bank, it describes the bank having a drive-through window as well. And I believe we have several establishments in West Wareham that have drive-throughs that exist. And therefore, that's at odds with what that table is. I think that's one of the areas we wanted to clarify and clear out, since West Wareham has become a commercial hub as well.
Correct, and there has been some requests by others for clarifying that the drive-through allowance in the zoning bylaw.
Well, from the town administration side, I think it's something we need to take care of, simply because we're sitting with existing establishments that have it, and then telling other establishments coming in they can't. That puts us in a very difficult position legally.
That's understandable. And I think that that's one of the things where we can have that discussion about the impact of drive-throughs and what's appropriate for allowances of drive-throughs and not just banks.
And I believe in one of the earlier corrections, drive-in should have been removed from that line, because we,
Well, what we discovered was it was both drive-in / drive-through.
well, It wasn't. It was drive-in for years, and then we tried to separate a drive-in restaurant from a drive-through.
Yeah.
And changed it to drive-through, but drive-in is still up there. So, I mean, I don't know many restaurants that you can't drive into, but there's not many you can drive through. But we added that drive-through to identify what the use actually was, you know. I don't know where you would find that, maybe in
That's listed in
the last zoning rewrite.
Yeah, that is listed in the, in one of the town meeting articles. We have a list. I should give kudos to Charlie Rowley at this point, because he helped in terms of the history of a number of the changes that were missed or included incorrectly from the previous town meetings. And we used his research extensively.
Thank you.
So you may want to consider as to whether or not you wanted to change any of these at this point.
Is that why it was highlighted, because you added drive-through?
Right.
I think the intent was to replace it with drive-through, but we can look that up.
The next one is animal kennels. Previously, it said harboring and/or care of more than 3 dogs, 3 months. So decided that needed clarification for 3 or more months per year. And that was our interpretation of what the intent of that particular section was.
Ken, could that list be put in alphabetical order without messing things up?
Yeah, it could be put in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
The order of this is in accordance with the order of the table. It matches the, oh, my commands aren't working that easy.
I was just thinking in terms of what's underneath the animal-related uses. And then further on, there's another series that's like that.
As you can see, it's almost in alphabetical order. I guess we could put both the table and the definitions in alphabetical order.
I'm not sure this is the right time to ask you this. If you go, I think there is a discrepancy between the numbers in the table of contents and the text body. If you can talk about it later if you wish.
Yeah, no, we caught that today, as a matter of fact. That there was that the table of contents hadn't been updated
Okay.
with the new numbers. One of the things I'd like to have is this to be automatic. Use the power of the word processor to create the table of contents from the content. We found that there's been some significant problems in trying to create the consistent format through the document. But the table of contents has been updated in the latest version to match with the content that says it's been changed.
Ken, could we look at the accessory uses just for a second? You just scroll past it.
Table? Sure.
It's not that one. It's a small use where the small table where it talks about setbacks, dimensional setbacks and so forth. Is
Oh,
that-
yeah, that's later on. That's
Oh,
in
okay. Well, I can wait till you get there.
further article.
That's fine. You can wait till you get there.
Capitalization.
I think I saw in the conference recreational district, section there that the label CNF was still used too. I don't remember exactly where it was, but,
In the table?
no, not the table. It was in the section that deals with the description of it. Might have been 760, wherever that is.
Okay. Again, this is some clarification using the term principal instead of PLE, PAL at the last three letters, and identifying that it's the Zoning Board of Appeals, that's the board that reviews permits for animal kennels.
Want to back that one up a minute? If on the animal kennels, if the special permit is granted, doesn't that gives it the use, why would they have to go back annually to the Board of Appeals?
Good question. I didn't question as to why town meeting had voted that previously.
Oh, okay.
Is it a license renewal issue?
I don't know. Do the selectmen issue licenses for dog kennels? Do they do it yearly?
I don't think so.
So if we want to be consistent, we could be consistent with the license.
It may be renewed through the selectman's office or the clerk's office. I don't believe we have a list of kennels that get renewed. Restaurants, et cetera, yes. No liquor licenses. I don't remember seeing kennels getting renewed by us.
That's something we can check on.
Yeah. I think usually the Board of Health gets involved with inspection on that.
Some more clarifications. We had the marijuana moratorium that was attached, adopted at the last town meeting. You will want a discussion on that later on, coming for spring town meeting as well, about what to do for to continue the moratorium or to adopt regulations.
I think we're locked into June. We have to do something. I don't believe the state will allow us to continue that moratorium. Same as the marijuana one originally, the other one.
Just as the state was supposed to hit their deadlines as well?
They're actually, Baker's administration last month has finalized a bunch of things, just so you know.
We'll put them in the CR.
Thank you.
Just to show you what kind of some of the changes, Section 425 said relationship to state and federal laws and regulations, and assumed that that was relationship.
Would they put two V's in variance?
That you don't see it as well on the screen, but that's the small v is crossed out.
No.
Yeah, it is.
This one also has the numbering system included, which uses a hierarchy of the tens, say section 440. Let's go back up. 440 being groundwater protection overlay district, and individual numbers underneath there to the higher level. And then a 0.1 to the next level down, and then a 1 for the next level of formatting for the structure. We found that worked for the most part throughout the document.
Ken, can you hit that plus on the bottom right and expand that wording a little bit.
Bottom,
See the bottom right, there's a plus signal. Keep going down right there. And a couple more, there you go.
make it easier for you to read.
Perfect. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Give the correct name of Business Development Overlay District. Camper or trailer also in ungaraged vehicles, something that had been adopted previously. Hearing instead of herein. Herein instead of hearing, I mean.
Ken, can you go back to the receiving areas? Just for a second. And the,
We are in the transfer of development regulations.
right, that's the TDR bylaw, right?
Right.
I remember at the public hearing when that was adopted, there was a question as to whether or not there would be transferred rights out of the R130 district. Is that the way it got voted? Because I saw the R130 in there as a,
It's a sending district.
yeah, as a sending district. I can remember speaking up about that because the size of the lots was so big, there wasn't an awful lot of advantage of trying to reserve lots out of that district. And it was already an agricultural watershed and groundwater protection district anyway. I wasn't aware that you could still do the TDR in the 130,
As a receiving area, you're saying?
or as a sending area, either one.
I think it's still in
Well, I think it's a sending area because of the large lots, road infrastructure costs were driven up, which, number one, gave us more pavement in a sensitive area and drove up development costs. That's why it was a sending area, but
Yeah, the receiving areas are limited to R30, MR30, R43, and R60. And R130 is not a receiving.
That's
Because
right,
it's-
but it didn't even, my argument was it didn't even make sense to use it as a sending area because the areas of the subdivision are so great already, and it already has protection as an agricultural watershed district. So there's very little that you can gain out of taking something out of that district and putting it somewhere else.
I guess the idea is that the R130, it was adopted as 130, a 3-acre area per lot because of the need to protect the qualities of the area.
That's right, that's why it was put in. I was just surprised to see it in the TDR bylaw, that's all. I thought we had
I think we
discussed
left,
taking it
we
out.
left it in there, Charlie. We went back and forth on it, but we did leave it in.
Okay.
The only thing we didn't do is, I think, after the fact, about banking, you know, the credits that came
Yeah.
up with Makepeace, that's still hanging out there. That was never decided on.
The land banking is
Yeah.
an option that the town of Plymouth has.
Plymouth has in theirs.
Which is something we can talk about for the coming next round for town meeting.
Spring.
Capitalization. This is still the TDR, transfer of development rights. Taking out large tracts since the Conference Recreation District has a definition of the size, minimum size lot necessary. A reference to a section that is no longer there was taken out.
So you just removed it, but you left the language there, you just removed the section. How,
Just remove the section number and say that it refers to this section of the bylaw, generally. All right, now we're getting into density, and I think, Charlie, this
Yep.
is where you had a comment.
Yeah.
Now, in these, there are several notes that are included. There was just some clarification as to what those notes meant. And the subheading, which I know don't have the right format, but it refers to the table above.
Ken, that was confusing to me. The term for each additional unit at the bottom, and I suspected that it's a code, but is it the 1 and 2 that you see under each title, like 1 family, 2 family, 1 family, is that, what does the number 2 refer to?
The number, A and B should be 1 and 2, 3 and C is 3, and D is note 4. I missed that in the draft that we had. Have to clarify that one. So the notes refer to these 2 districts.
Excuse me, Ken, how are they handling in-law apartments?
Accessory apartments or in-law apartments are not allowed by the use table. Except in the CG district. Otherwise, the accessory apartments or in-law apartments are not allowed
In the residential districts?
in any residential district.
but they have been created over the years, so
Yeah.
how did that happen?
That's enforcement.
I mean, these were permitted
Oh, these are permitted.
allowances. I mean, granted, a lot of them weren't, but there were also permitted in-law apartments, say.
Well, I guess we need clarification between what a 2-family is and what a,
Is it by
house
leaving the
with-
kitchen out? Is that the little glitch? By leaving the kitchen out, they could put the addition on and,
it wasn't a full unit then if it was shared kitchen facilities. But the MR30 allows multi-units,
Right.
and I think maybe we need clarification between what a multifamily unit is and what an accessory apartment and a principal unit is. We assume that 7-family meant 2-family.
is that a typo?
Assuming that was the case, since we have 1-family, 2-family, and other residential use in the listing. So that was a I call it an educated guess on our part, and hopefully it makes sense to you as well.
Okay, that's the table, Ken, I was concerned
Yeah, now
with.
which table?
Yeah. Can you
626 or?
Scroll down just, yeah. Go back to the top of it there. Where it starts the accessory uses.
This is industrial. Is accessory after this? No, accessory is before.
Okay. What I had a question on was the height in the village districts or in commercial districts, an accessory use can be 30 feet, but in residential districts, the height of an accessory use, which could be a two-car garage, can only be 20. Was that changed from 15? There was one that was 15 at one point.
I'd have to go back over the history again on that,
Okay.
as to whether or not, when that was changed, and what it was changed from. But there was nothing that said that wasn't done correctly as in the previous history of zone changes.
Now, in the B dot, it says C note C, and then the notes are labeled 1, 2, and 3.
Right, so A, B, and C should be 1, 2, and 3. This was a change in the table for commercial and industrial uses where residential is not allowed. It seems superfluous to include residential as a dimensional standard when it wasn't allowed in the district. The term sign standards was changed to design standards. One of the things that was included in here and left, and you may want to change it, and it came as a result of the Patterson's Brook. It was identified as part of the Patterson's Brook. And here it is. Under 752.11. Exceptions are subject to approval by Industrial District Design Review Committee, of which there is none.
Can't you delete that?
And we could delete that if
Yes.
we think it's appropriate.
But should it be approved by some committee?
It doesn't exist.
That committee.
Interior cladding materials and other masonry, unit, stone, wood.
Could there be a general overall design review committee just for all categories?
I guess this requires some additional thought because this allowed some exceptions to be approved by some form of town committee. And it could be the planning board or the zoning board of appeals that does provides that same exception. And so it makes sense if that were to be changed to the reviewing board, the special permit granting board, or site plan review authority that's taking that function to review the plan.
The only problem there, if you have two different boards doing site plan, you might have inconsistency between the two.
There shouldn't
I don't know what a
be a standard.
developer would design to in that case.
Yeah.
Should or shouldn't.
In this case, what we've done is we've left it in. There's no function there, so it is neutral in its outcome.
I think by leaving it in, an applicant who say, I'm entitled to have it heard. I don't care if you don't have the design review committee in existence, make it be in existence, because
So would you change that to the special permit granting authority, just,
That would be the board reviewing the project.
I think that undermines I think it undermines the role of the planning board. If another body can undo the planning board's decisions. No?
Right.
Did the industrial design ever exist?
That's some part of the history that I wouldn't know.
I have no idea.
Charlie, do you know?
judge it from
I don't believe it
the,
does.
judge
I
it by
think
the
that was-
looks of the industrial
that was
park, I'd
set
say
up
no.
originally. I think that was a part of the original agreement with the EDIC. And when basically they conveyed all the property over, that commission, I believe, just disappeared. I don't think it's in existence at all. Just as a side, Town of Mashpee has a design review committee, and it's a separate committee from the ZBA, and it's a separate committee from the planning board. But it's made up of a member of the planning board, member of the Board of Health, I think the fire chief sits on it, police chief, the building inspector. All those various people that have input into a particular project sit on that committee. And they go through the design of the project in an informal way, and they make recommendations to whichever board is going to be looking at it. And the board takes into consideration what the design review committee suggests. And a lot of times, the architectural features and so forth are discussed in detail in that committee. It's worked out pretty well for them over the years, but it's another
But they're working with,
non-voting board, so to speak. They vote amongst themselves, but they can simply pass on recommendations to the planning board and the ZBA.
but they're working with written standards of some
They
degree,
are, it's
right?
written into the zoning bylaw, the design review committee, and who has to be on it and so forth, and what their function is. Yeah. I'd be happy to peel off a copy of it and send it to you, Ken, if you'd like to see it.
Sure.
Maybe something for, maybe not this particular work through, but the next time.
So if they wanted to use metal on the exterior of the building, they would have to go in front of the Industrial District Design Review Committee?
That's right. That's the way this reads now. And the question, I guess, if you want to strike that as part of this round, or to allow it to stand.
Another part of the bylaw refers to metal as a natural material.
Yeah. Under the commercial standard,
I would
metal is allowed as a side.
I would recommend striking it from this version, and Charlie's idea, suggestion makes more sense for to get projects to be compatible and to be proper for the towns. Is that something that has to happen through town meeting to create?
Yeah.
I think for the next round, I think it's be worth trying,
Okay.
my suggestion. But I would urge striking it. I see that as creating problems. Just my thought.
Makes
Some word changes, wordsmithing. This is cluster development, multifamily.
Yep.
These are other development standards. Then we get into parking. And the recommendation had been to completely redo the parking table. Noticed a spelling error there. But this is just for clarification of the existing regulations. Lighting is changed to lighting. Article 10, this section is on landscaping and landscape buffers. This is the signage section, Article 11.
Marijuana's mentioned again in there?
Marijuana signs, yeah,
Marijuana signs.
right,
Smoke
There.
signals.
they're regulated. The sign standards are fairly long. Performance standards. Article 13 is for non-conforming uses and structures. I've had a conversation with the building commissioner on rewriting this section. This is something that the Board of Appeals uses on a regular basis. Almost every meeting, they have to deal with the non-conforming, pre-existing non-conforming uses or non-conforming. And we want to help clarify this section so it's easier for the Board of Appeals to follow the regulations as well as people to understand that. But we haven't tried to address it at this point other than clarification of this section of the article, where it refers back to Article 9 of the parking spaces and what's required by Section 920. I'm moving through kind of fast if you notice something. Site plan review.
Ken, one thing I've noticed in a couple of sections, where it talks about the requirements for the plan, and it talks about the contours being at a 2-foot contour interval.
Yes.
That's way too much for detailed design. It needs to be pulled back. If you've got a grading site for a solar field, that's one thing. But if you've got some real detailed grading that needs to be done in a commercial site where the grading is detailed and is complicated, trying to do it with a 2-foot contour plan is almost impossible. That means that you've got as much as a foot error that's built into those contours. So,
Which can be substantial. And here's to point out what Charlie's talking about. New contour lines resulting from earth movement at 2-foot intervals is what's listed as the standard.
Yeah.
For that grading plan at this time.
It could be at 2-foot intervals, but there ought to be something inserted in there that says, or other such interval that is required for the detail of the plan. So it gives some leverage to the planning board to say, well, look, you've got to give us a little bit more detail, higher detail on what you're showing. It isn't enough to really show what's going to happen.
So that's site plan review, and Article 16 are definitions. There are a number of changes in there. What abandonment means for the use or the structure. And this conforms with building code. And then there's a description of the boundaries of the districts.
You're missing a T in business development.
Yeah, I noticed that. There's a T missing in development, overlay district. So that's these are the word descriptions of the district boundaries that exist. And we found some corrections in these based on going back to the original descriptions and including them. And then there's zoning bylaw history as the second appendix. And this was added on to update it for the newer changes. And this is where we can find out when something was changed and go back and figure out why if necessary. There have been quite a few changes. And so it's not surprising that there are some errors along the way in some of the content. So we've tried to address that with these. After this, as I said, we can talk about Springtown meeting and what we want to accomplish as changes for the zoning at that point.
Is there anyone here with any questions on the proposed article?
Richard Cirque, an attorney from Plymouth. I just wanted to pick up, looking ahead at perhaps the spring town meeting, a couple of the issues that came up when I appeared before the committee that was working on
Zoning Study Committee.
the zoning study committee was the building commissioner's focus on pre-existing non-conforming lots and pre-existing non-conforming uses. That's an issue that needs to be focused on from a substantive point of view, because so much of the work that comes before the Zoning Board of Appeals has to do with non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures and non-conforming lots. And different towns treat those subjects differently. And so that's an issue that's going to have to be studied and clarified to as great a degree as possible. The other thing that I had mentioned to the Zoning Study Committee was with respect to site plan approval. In Article 15, there's some mixed language that talks about site plan dash special permit. And the distinction between the two is important because site plan approval only requires a majority, while special permit requires a supermajority. So when you go through Article 15 for the spring town meeting, I would suggest it's important to clarify that language so that everyone knows what kind of an animal you're dealing with. Is it site plan approval or is it special permit? Because the voting is different. And I know there's an effort to make the special permit granting authority and the site plan approval authority the same if it's possible, but it's important to distinguish between the two.
Good point, and we had a discussion on that because what happened previously in the original creation of the site plan review bylaw, there were two different levels. And it changed and it became one with some modifications that didn't quite flow through and make it clear as to what was site plan review and what was special permit.
That's all.
So what I have is a couple of changes that we can include. Check on the licenses for the dogs. Check on the kennels. I mean, check on the table notes. Some spelling errors that still remain. Other than that, I'll leave it to the board to identify any further changes you think are.
Did you get the contour, Charlie? The 2-foot contour?
We could put that in. That doesn't necessarily fit with our technical amendment because that's more of a substantive change. But if it's important to the board, we'll include it at this point.
I would like to agree with Charlie on that point.
On which, again?
In the requirements for filing of plans.
On the
That-
contour?
That the contours be expanded to include 2 foot or better, depending on the grading.
Yeah, on the topography, I mean, sometimes you need 1-foot contours sometimes to make a judgment. 1-foot intervals.
Yeah, 1 foot, sometimes even 1/2 foot spot elevations.
Well, how do you determine that ahead of time? You wait till they submit it and say you need more gradients?
It becomes a part of the review process, George. When you see a plan that has 2-foot contours on it at the very beginning on the blank piece of property, and you don't see any spot grades along the street, for example, that show you what's happening along the existing street grade, it's pretty hard to determine exactly how things are going to fit together.
But
So
my question is, you're talking about asking for more identification of gradients
If
in certain cases, so.
I think if you include with the 2-foot contours or other such contour interval as may be necessary to
Define.
evaluate design, for example.
Could you not request that now?
If it's written in that they only have to provide 2-foot contours, I don't have much leverage.
Okay.
But if it's 2-foot or some other contour interval that enhances design or allows for the review of the design, if the language like that can be put in there.
Okay, I
If
get
they
you.
want to put 2 feet as a contour interval, and then in looking at the plan and review, you say, look, this isn't enough detail, you need to go out and get a little bit more information. At least, as a reviewer, I have a little backup, and so do you. But you don't have to go out there and spell it out that you need 1-foot contours if 2-foot contours will do. But you need the possibility or the option of saying, you gotta get a little bit better, more detail here for what you're doing. So,
That's what I was trying to quantify. When do you say you have to do it and you don't? That's,
it becomes a matter of the review and what you see on the plan that's been presented and what they're trying to accomplish with that information.
I think there's some flexibility in the special permit granting authority's powers that allows them to ask for additional information if appropriate, if necessary, as part of the planning.
but that's only if it's a special permit.
Right.
I'm curious, there was some correction that needed to be made to the language of a bond. Is that included in here, or is that a separate subject?
Separate subject.
Because I saw bond mentioned, you were
That's right.
passing through here quickly, it said cash
It is
bond.
listed in here. You can put in performance bonds as a requirement, as a condition of approval.
You know, on the issue of the 1-foot intervals versus
Mhm.
2, if the applicant knows that if he thinks it's only 2 feet, he sends his surveyor out and they shoot 2-foot contours, then he's gotta go back another trip, another expense. So I think if he is aware, and they have obviously he's working with his engineering firm, he knows that he may have to do 1-foot spot elevations in certain areas, and he's on notice. And it'll save him the time and the cost of sending the survey team out again, I think, Charlie.
Well, you remember the procedure, and I brought that up here, is that there's a pre-application review where the plans are reviewed prior to being submitted. And it's a requirement that they meet with in my office to review the plans. Secondly, there's a application submittal requirement that you have to submit to the permitting authority. That is, in the case of the planning board, you've had that recently where a plan is on the agenda for submittal, not for hearing, but just for submittal. And so you also have a chance to review the plan at that point as well.
I think the point is that at that point, the plan's already been created. And to change the gradient requirement means more field work and more expense, so.
Somewhere you gotta put it in there, it has to be known up front before they even go to that point. I think that's what George, I think everybody feels the same way. We wanna notify them before they go that far.
I would say if they're good designers, they know it's necessary to.
We don't
create
always
the
do it
correct
with
plan.
designers.
Sometimes they're so good, they know what to leave out.
I think what we're looking for, Ken, is we want a statement in there, so it's, when they read through, they pre-req what they need. They know up front that they might have to do it. Then if it's a halfway decent design, they're gonna say, well, they might catch me with this one, and we wanna put them on notice before they go that far.
Right.
Otherwise, it becomes a pissing contest back and forth, and we've been through that several times. Doesn't work too well.
Maybe what you can do is say it's 1-foot contour intervals unless the board allows otherwise.
Yeah, would that work for you, Charlie?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I would have left it 2 or such other interval as is necessary for adequate design and review of the project. But
Some kind
if
of
we
Is that-
start with 1, that's fine, that's that much better.
Is that something we could handle in the rules and regs, so it would,
No,
I think you can handle it in the rules and regs of the special
Saying-
permit.
under subdivisions you can, but site plan review you can't, it's gotta be in here.
A special permit could, but site plan review is different.
Make it as
Could-
stringent as
if-
possible, put it right up front. If they want some leeway, let them come back and beg for mercy. Put them on notice right up front. Because otherwise, they're gonna skate right around every time. 80% of the time, that's what's gonna happen.
could you put something like where 2-foot intervals do not properly illustrate the street road grading or the site? 1 foot could be,
1 foot's the ideal in most cases, 90% of the time.
Yeah, if you're gonna change 2 foot to 1 foot, then you're getting a lot more detail automatically.
mhm.
And if they wanted to come in with something greater than that, 2-foot contours, then they could ask for a waiver. But, might not be through this board. It'd have to be a variance if they wanted to waive the requirements once it's in the bylaw.
Got that, Ken?
Yeah, I think what we do is say, what I'd like to say is 1 foot contour intervals unless allowed by the reviewing authority.
If they don't like it right off the bat, it's gonna put up a red flag, and they're gonna go, and they're gonna start talking.
Right.
And then, you know, like I said, then it can be taken care of.
And
But if
he's
nothing
not-
is said, they're
he's
gonna
not
go
telling them the
easiest route.
standards.
They're not gonna do it.
So
Then they're gonna say, hey, you gotta go
he
back.
is
There's not enough
absolutely
detail
against
there.
confrontation.
Oh, geez, we gotta go back, we gotta spend another $20,000, it's gonna take another
You
month.
notice how
And
it
it becomes, you know, goes back and forth and nobody wins.
shakes and gets
Right.
upset.
How often does this cause a problem, do you?
More times than you'd think. Where you've got an existing site that's all paved, and somebody's going in there and doing a reconstruction, you're gonna get a bunch of spot grades, which is fine. That's even more accurate than the 1-foot contours. But for some of the things that we saw, say, up in Charlotte Furnace Road, they were all 2-foot contours. And where the grading was getting tight to the property boundary, and you were in between contours or they were spread out, you didn't know whether or not you were actually gonna make it before you reached the property boundary. So there's a lot of cases where that comes into play where you wouldn't think it would, but it does.
Put one
It just makes a better plan, and you're getting a better result. Once you compress those contours, you're getting more detail, you're getting a better product in the long run. Just makes it easier for us to review it
Mhm.
and for you to look at it, and the client gets a better result.
1 foot.
1 foot sounds good? Okay. We spent enough time on this one. Anything else? You want to go to the solar bylaw then?
George, just as an aside, the old subdivision rules and regulations used to say for a preliminary plan, use 5-foot contours. So guys used to take a USGS map and interpolate between the 10-foot contours and put that on the preliminary plan.
Becomes a file to fit.
Yeah.
On this particular one, I would, if you're treating, are you treating these canopy-mounted ones the same as ground-mounted?
Yes. I talked to the building commissioner about this. And then one of the reasons why putting the canopy into the definition was to specify, and he said he could do that, is to consider a canopy as a ground-mounted.
Well, on that basis, I would have to say no to industrial and institutional zones. I don't want to see either one of those cluttered up with ground-mounted solar. I mean, we set aside industrial land to create jobs and create industry, not electricity.
The thing about a canopy one is you can have business underneath, you can have parking
But you
lots.
said it's treated the same as ground-mounted, so that, if you allow,
It could be.
yeah. If you differentiate, then yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing canopy mounted in a parking lot at an industrial site, something along those lines, but
Is canopy what is in the parking lot at Upper Cape Regional?
Yes.
What is it?
Canopy, you know, you got parking.
It's essentially, it looks like
Almost
a,
can't do
yeah.
spots.
like a roof over a parking lot
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Do we want that in an industrial park? You know, we open up Pandora's box when you say canopy mounting is okay. So I have an industrial site, I have 10,000 square feet of parking. Hey, I might as well get some extra income, I'm gonna put solar panels over it, let my employees park underneath. It's not the most prettiest thing in the world. Some places it works well, but I don't think it works well in an industrial zone. Here we go again, are we giving away the farm? You know, carte blanche, do what you wanna do?
Does it affect the watershed? I mean,
Not if it's above an impervious surface to start with, Mark.
if it's above an impervious.
If it's over a paved area, it's no different. It's falling on the panels and then onto the paved surface underneath it, so it's not adding anything more to it.
So that
But
goes for both.
Huh?
That goes for pervious and impervious. The water theoretically ends up in the same place.
Yeah, it's just, that it's not adding impervious surface to an otherwise parked,
Mhm.
paved parking areas. That's all I'm saying.
So this is a regulation, goes through a couple of different sections. We have the tables, the use tables have to be modified for large ground-mounted solar energy facilities and on-site solar energy, which is something that supplies power to the facility on site, on that property. Then we have the regulations themselves, which are added to Article 5, supplemental regulations. And that includes the standards and design requirements for the regulations or the solar energy construction. Then we have
You don't see a
Yeah.
conflict with the two there?
conflict in what way?
The two categories, like it's no, no, no up top and yes, yes, yes on the bottom?
Well, notice that yes, yes, yes is as an accessory use, as of right, accessory, and supplying on-site power. So this is something that is a series of panels or some structure on the property that's providing the power to the site.
Ken, excuse me, is it possible to get a visual definition of on-site solar energy? But can my neighbor have, what is it limited to?
It's limited to the setbacks and the dimensional standards for any kind of structure on site, plus
But if
the
it's,
supplemental regulations that specify things like noise, lighting, landscaping. Everything that's in Article 7, design standards and guidelines, and Article 10, landscaping standards of the bylaw.
Does it say anywhere that the solar panels cannot be any closer to the road than the structure itself on the property?
Yes, it says that it has to conform to the dimensional standards as required by the zoning bylaw.
Well, I'm just asking, like, even in industrial or commercial building setback, like on Charlotte Furnace Road, 300 feet, and this regulations say they only have to be back 100 feet. They have a 200-foot void, but could they put solar panels in that area?
Yes, they could.
And I would say that should be taken out. I think that is just unacceptable.
To put solar panels in the front yard?
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
There goes your buffering. That's the reason they put a
Right,
setback was for
right.
buffering.
You know, it seems to me that solar panels, although they're supposed to be good for the environment, seem to be taking up a lot of the open space, natural resources, covering them up.
Does this have to go before the town now? Well, my question is based on my belief that it hasn't been studied enough in general. And you know, you mentioned that it would conform to the same regulations as for a building, but we pretty much know the limitations that a building imposes on a site generally. Residential, you know, it's going to be a house. Here, I can't visualize, I mean, there's no way to support this, not knowing what the consequences can be for our cities.
Let's go back a half hour ago when we were talking about design standards.
Exactly.
We don't have any.
Yeah.
All of a sudden now, we're talking further down the road, hey, let's put solar panels, get rid of all that. We don't care what it looks like, solar panels. They're pretty generic looking, and like I said, I think the consensus of the majority of the board, I think we're all in the same game, you know, same cat. You know, we're trying to get some kind of design standards, so it looks like something, and we're defeating the whole purpose with letting solar panels do what they want with solar panels.
Well, just to point out that what you have right now is no regulation. And you haven't seen those on site.
We want solar regulations, but I don't think we want to make them that open that they have carte blanche to do what they want to do.
Are there,
They don't have carte blanche. There are design standards in here that specify what's required. And if you look at what we have here, these are the standards: the stormwater management, landscaping, site grading, vegetation, compliance with state and federal regulations, having the documentation on sound
What
and
sound?
inverters.
What sound is generated by solar panels?
from the transformers?
The inverters.
the
That's it.
inverters, which was a whole issue with the wind towers, right?
Right.
If you ask these people in Buttermilk Bay about their wind towers, they'll say, "Well, it's not the eyesore of this, it's the sound that gets
Well, the sound.
generated."
Right.
Yeah, so I'm unclear on the canopy. I want to show you what this canopy looks like, because this is Upper Cape's canopy, if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I think you have to be very careful with this, because this is not hidden in an industrial setting. I mean, we don't want to look at that throughout the Walmart parking lot. You know, if we look at what ADM did, it's off, it's behind vegetation, it's hidden. Unless it's an aerial view, you're not going to be able to see that. I think, my question is, does the state have bylaws that we're just coupling off the states? Has the state addressed this at all? Thank you.
I think
This is a combination of the state bylaw from the Department of Energy Resources and the towns of Marion, Bourne, and Plymouth.
It's a new animal in our urban settings, and I don't think it's been studied enough as to its visual implications and consequences. I think you could end up with neighborhoods that are crowded with industrial type looking items.
We already have that.
I just think it's been studied enough, not from your efforts, just in general. And if I may, go back to Charlie's suggestion earlier. Timing, of course, is an issue, but the idea of having a design review committee that oversees work and that proposed for the town is a good solution. And nothing. Forgive me, but you know, on Nantucket, the Historic District Commission, you can't do a window detail without getting the approval. That's a little overboard, but this discussion that we're having now, I just don't see, I don't see it.
But I think what you risk right now is if you don't set your bylaws, they will argue it defaults to a state or federal guideline. And then we're gonna have to make a decision on that. So,
Well, I think this is a good start, and maybe not be so generous with the allowed uses. The reason I tried to differentiate between canopy and ground-mounted is like, if you say institutional, that means you could have all that open land between the hospital and the high school would all be available for solar project. I
That's
don't
right.
think that would be very appealing.
Well,
But
what we could
On the
do,
other hand, if Toby wanted to put a canopy over one of their parking lots, that would be, I don't think that would be as undesirable as cutting down 30 acres of trees to be green.
Ken, is there an actual definition of what you mean by on-site solar or ground-mounted?
yeah, there is.
George, what do you have there?
Minimum nameplate capacity, 250 kilowatt. Over, it would be the large ground mount, and at or under would be the on-site solar.
Yeah, to get to 250, we'd have to be covering half the state of Massachusetts, I think.
No, you don't, not 250.
To get to 250, what is the surface area of that?
I put it in a memo in your folders on the sizes of different projects that have been approved, the solar energy farms that have been approved by special permit over the last couple of years of information I had available. Like 418 County Road is a 2.2 megawatt DC. And that has 7,000 modules, photovoltaics, and 4 inverters.
The acreage you list on that chart is the acreage of the site, not the acreage, not the coverage of the panels, right?
That's correct. Unless it says fenced, which is, if it's fenced, then that's probably the area of the solar field. Just want to point out that 250 kilowatts is 0.25 megawatts. So it's would be an eighth of the size of the 418 County Road.
So does it make sense to, as a Band-Aid, limit the size based on acreage or kilowatts, forcing a special review? Because I agree with you that we really need a subject matter expert to advise the town on, here's the national impacts of this, here's what best practices have found. But in the interim, do we want to accept anything more than what already exists in this town? Because basically we have to put a stopgap here on what exists here right now, which could be determined based on acreage zoning, megawatt determination, and not to say that anything can be approved beyond this capacity. That would be a limiting factor.
Visibility.
Right, I think it'd be unreasonable for us to, if something is presented to us within this existing model that's in front of us right now, that's already been approved by the town, to reject that. Now, right now, none of this is a canopy, right?
No, none of these projects are canopies.
Right. So, I think we can make a solid argument that no canopy models have been approved in the town, and until,
I'll see right now, the area that issues the credits for these things, they're putting the emphasis on canopy and to use existing open spade.
You mean roof mounted?
I think the emphasis now is on canopy mounted. You know,
to take the
they
total
seem to
parking lot.
change. They'll go from ground mounted, they'll go to building mounted, they'll go to small building mounted and large. They'll put the emphasis on different types of things, and I think currently they're trying to make more use of canopy mounted systems of varying sizes.
Canopy mounted systems are gonna be relatively small in comparison to the fields that we've seen to date.
But if that's where they're getting the subsidies, there's probably no limit as to how big they'll want to make them.
But my point was that I know of some instances where they have put the canopies in because they wanted to augment the electricity that they were using on their own facilities right there on the
Mhm.
spot. It wasn't necessarily to generate electricity to sell to the electric company. It was simply to augment what they were already using. And so it's different than putting a solar field together like we've seen on County Road, where they're gonna generate electricity and kick it out into the system. It's a little different than that.
But the location of those canopies, I think, can be
The cases I'm thinking of,
visibly
it was over a
not
parking
very
area.
appealing.
It wasn't,
I mean, you're talking about parking lots now, we have standards for parking lots where we ask them to landscape.
Right.
And make them look appealing.
I would
The
think,
canopy's gonna take that limited appeal away and just
Not-
become
not
an
saying they wouldn't,
industrial-looking facility. And to be honest with you, I think it's not something I would wanna see in this town. You know, 'cause the places that you are gonna see it are the parking lots of Walmart, the parking lots of, you know, the shopping centers and things of that nature, and I don't think that that's appealing.
one of the things you could do then is take it out of the definition or specify that they're not acceptable at this time. And that what we have is ground-mounted solar. And by the way, most of them are in the R130, R60, MR30 districts.
And some of them are horrific. I mean, the neighbors that abut those solar fields, properties have plummeted in value. They're fenced out of what used to be natural land. The town did not do a good job in requesting berms, you know. A fence I don't feel is adequate. And so, I mean, I'm all for solar power, but not at the expense of the neighbors or the expense of the town.
Which is why this one has much heavier requirements for buffers
Yeah.
in this bylaw, this version of the bylaw.
I mean, I know Makepeace worked with us on one of their projects where they had panels 7 feet, 4 inches or something like that above grade, and they put a natural berm in front of it from the neighbors and then landscaped it, and I thought that was the best that I've seen so far in town. And then we have others that just put up a chain link fence, and the kids are in the backyard and that fence is right in their backyard, and they're out looking at acres and acres of panels.
See, the R130s and even the R60s seem to lend themselves more to a special permit than a no, than CS or CG, because there are some very remote areas that could be very easily screened from view and nobody would even know the system was there. Where commercial strip, you know, within 500 feet of Cranberry Highway, you can have a ground-mounted solar.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's other design criteria that probably makes it impractical, but, you know, it seems like, and again, I wouldn't support it in industrial or in institutional. I think your nose ought to be on that end. But,
So to change this around, you're saying special permit, and we didn't discuss whether it was the planning board or the zoning board of appeals. even though the last few have been the zoning board of appeals. But if you had an SPZ in the R130 and the R60 district, would that be acceptable?
I mean, that's more palatable to me than on the other end of the scale. I mean, because there are large tracts of land out there where you could do it and nobody would even know it was there. You'd be well buffered from the neighbors, and granted, you don't want it in the middle of a residential subdivision in the I-130, but I think we need to.
I really don't want it anywhere it can be seen.
Just for the discussion, I'm currently working on a house design where they are going to use solar, and there are some very good-looking products, but the responsibility on the owner and on the supplier to do it right, and that's what worries me, that how to limit or how to control. But I mean, in the submissions to us, I've seen some very, very attractive solar structures. And it wouldn't worry me to have them, but how are we able to control what that's the issue, and I don't see it there. If we could create a design review committee, that would go a long way.
I think we might have some subject matter specialists in the audience tonight.
That would be good if they could speak.
Yeah, maybe we,
That's what all the smiling faces are back there, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I'll get whacked.
Oh, that wasn't gonna be my guess.
I took that as an invitation, but Good evening. For the record, again, my name is Rich Cirque. I'm an attorney in Plymouth, and I'm here in behalf of Blue Wave Capital, which is proposing, it hasn't yet been submitted, but is proposing a large ground-mounted facility in Wareham, and it'll be submitted shortly. To my right is Eric Graber Lopez, and to his right is Mark Sylvia, who are from Blue Wave. I know this is a general discussion about the bylaw and not about any particular project, and so that's the way I'll keep it. I have some concerns primarily about the table that you see before you. Under this table, large ground-mounted solar energy facilities are prohibited in all residential districts unless they can obtain a use variance. And the Zoning Board of Appeals, under your bylaw, is authorized to grant a use variance, namely a variance to allow property to be used for a purpose that's otherwise prohibited. But this bylaw, with all of the no's in the residential districts, means that if any of the facilities that now exist, and they all exist in the residential districts, if they were to be proposed, they would need a use variance. Now, if the concern, and I know it is a concern, is the proximity to nearby homes, that concern could be better addressed by focusing on setback requirements from nearby homes and/or buffer requirements from nearby homes. But as you indicated a moment ago, Mr. Barrett, if you're talking about remote areas of the town where there are few residential houses, the question is, why prohibit large ground-mounted solar energy facilities in those areas when the houses are few and far between, especially since that's where the facilities that exist have been located. This bylaw says that those facilities are allowed in the commercial, marine, institutional, and industrial districts. But for how much land in those districts would large ground-mounted solar energy be the highest and best use? Let me just hand out, if I can, the zoning map to make my point clear. Under the table, the only zones in which large ground-mounted solar facilities could be located would be the commercial districts, and those, as you know, are the ones that hug Route 28, and they are in magenta and in maroon. And the industrial district at the quadrant between 495 and 195, the Conference Recreational Center, which, as you know, is on Onset, and then finally the institutional zone, which is located in light green where the Toby Hospital is. This table says that that's the only place where ground-mounted solar can go. Is that wise, given the fact that there are none there, and given the fact that those areas are perhaps better developed for other purposes and should not be set aside for solar purposes? How many parcels of land in the CS, CG, CP, CR, marine, institutional, and industrial districts are likely to be the sites of large ground-mounted solar facilities? And as Mr. Barrett indicated, how many in the industrial, for example, would you want to be? How many sites there would you want to have solar on? So I just suggest to you that if any of the solar facilities that currently exist, whether they're viewed as good or bad, if they were to come before you today with this bylaw, they would need a use variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals because it's prohibited where they're currently located. So this is a wholesale change from what now exists to what would be permitted in the future. This does not address also, what about overlay districts such as the BDOD? Since that's overlaying a residential district, does that mean that solar facilities are also prohibited in the BDOD because they're prohibited in the underlying district? I would assume so, but I don't know. State law prohibits unreasonable regulations, quote unquote, on solar, except, quote, where necessary to protect the public health, safety, or welfare. Now, what constitutes unreasonable regulation, of course, is subject to interpretation. But that's what the state has said in terms of where solar can be and where it can be prohibited. And there's case law that suggests that if the town sets aside a certain area for solar and prohibits it in other areas, that may pass muster. But I suggest to you, based on what I've said, that the practical effect of this table would be to prohibit large ground-mounted solar in Wareham entirely. Because you're taking all the residential off the table, and you're saying it's got to go into the commercial, institutional, marine, and industrial areas, and I question whether that really is practical or not. Whether that land is really going to be used for this purpose, or ought to be. Now, remember also that any bylaw that's passed by town meeting has to be approved by the Attorney General. And I think you have to be concerned about whether a bylaw that says it's permitting solar in certain areas while prohibiting it in other areas is going to be approved by the Attorney General if the areas where it's permitted are unlikely to see any. Consider as well that the town gains significant revenue under payment in lieu of taxes, or so-called pilot agreements, from solar facilities. And consider as well the minimal municipal services that are required for solar facilities, especially when compared to alternative uses such as residential subdivisions in residential areas. If you're talking about a solar facility, ground-mounted, in a remote area of the R130 or R60 districts, that might be more revenue positive to the town than if the land were otherwise developable for residential subdivision purposes and generated the need to educate more children and the need to rely more on police and fire facilities than solar facilities do. Again, I say many towns have addressed solar in many different ways, and I think it entirely appropriate for Wareham to join the list of municipalities that have enacted solar provisions in their zoning bylaws. But the tools, I think, to address the issue of the effect on homes and homeowners, the tools are setbacks and screening requirements. They're not prohibitions, because the no's and the yeses are too blunt of an instrument to really control where solar should be. There are two other comments that I wanted to make. In the design standards, and I'm talking in particular about section 594.3 under item 6. It says, clear cutting of trees and natural vegetation within 5 years shall be prohibited for the construction, operation, and maintenance of the solar or photovoltaic facility. Now, no one likes to see the unnecessary cutting down of trees, but what this would do would mean that you are basically prohibiting any solar facility to be located on a site that's going to have to be cleared of trees in order for it to be placed there. And query whether that's whether you you want to do that or not.
Well, I think the attempt is to not see any clear cutting unless there is an actual project that's gonna take place, referencing the building permit being issued.
Oh,
But this is wording that we put in this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
oh.
Hey, Charlie, is one of these
Yeah, that's
Toby
new.
Road?
That's newer than what I had, okay.
Is one of these Toby Road?
The, and regarding your,
Oh, okay, that's fine. I mean, what
Okay.
I had was clear cutting of trees and natural vegetation within 5 years shall be prohibited for the construction, operation, and maintenance of the solar voltaic facility.
and back to your comment on a variance, and just generically speaking,
Well, this is this point right
they
here.
would be hard pressed to meet the criteria for a variance.
Absolutely,
Regulations.
absolutely. There,
It's not a simple thing, and it just, at face value, I would say it wouldn't qualify for one.
yeah, I mean, and.
Where's the hardship? You're creating your own hardship,
Right,
number one.
and a use variance is the most extreme variance that you can ever ask for. It's not like a dimensional variance. A use variance is basically to, as its name implies, to use property for a prohibited purpose.
Mhm.
Good luck to you. And even if you get the variance from the zoning board, which is the variance granting authority, if you're appealed, good luck to you to hold that variance, because most variances that are granted when challenged are turned down because of the difficult criteria. So, again, on that point, what you're saying is that you're prohibiting the locating of these facilities in the very areas of town in which they've been located. Now, if they're all failures and you want to eliminate them all, that's one thing, but that's not the case.
What is your suggested setback?
I don't have an easy answer. Different towns have answered that differently. You know, Carver, for example, recently enacted a bylaw that said the panels have to be 200 feet from your own lot line. Okay? And I have a situation in which somebody's panels are going to be 160 feet from the lot line, so he needs a variance, even though the land over the lot line is a cranberry bog. So there's no house there. So that's why setbacks are one tool, but also distance between houses. In other words, how close is your facility to the nearest house? That might be a more true measure of the effect that the facility will have on the neighborhood, rather than setback from a lot line.
And the buffer, how do they address the buffer? Is it to completely obstruct view or partially obstruct view?
Well, again, different bylaws treat it differently. Some just prohibit any alteration within a certain number of feet from the lot line to the panels. Others require that area to be supplemented by plantings, by fencing, by earthen berms. You can be creative. And the state has a model solar bylaw. Have you looked at that, Ken?
Yeah, this was based on that as well.
Okay.
And what we've done is we've also put into this the standards of the landscape, Article 10, which requires buffers and plantings
Sure.
and
Well-
setbacks.
Well, one part of that we could add that may not be in there is that no panels will be set until the buffers are in place.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we had an issue where one of the applicants destroyed the existing buffer, put the panels in, and put a whole neighborhood in an uproar because they had panels in their backyard all of a sudden.
Well, I mean, here, this thing is, you're not going to be able to cut trees down until a building, and you want to make sure that the trees that are going to form part of your buffer are unaffected.
You'd think.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. What do you want us to do? Just, here, do what you want to do, come back when you're done, and that's it. You have, you're not giving us any input, you're just telling us all the negative things if we say we don't like the way it is.
I have some
want to
questions.
investigate.
Be more than happy to,
Yeah.
I wasn't here to write the bylaw. I'm just,
That's good.
yeah, I mean, I'm here to question whether or not what you're proposing
Well-
is a good idea or not. I think it can be made
Oh,
better.
I don't think we really know. I think
Yeah.
we need a little bit more education ourselves,
Mm.
instead of putting all our trust in the bad guys. Because we look at the developers, the bad guys. Our job is to protect the town. And what we see, the way it is now, we don't like it, but we need more information, I
Yeah.
think, to make a good judgment,
I
a
ha-
good decision.
I think,
Might I ask some questions? These are to Mr. Cirque and the professional. So, right now, we have a number of projects that have already been built.
Yeah,
Wareham has a lot of open land, natural open land. So we're a prime target, I'm sure, for your type of business. My question is, currently, based on Wareham's geographic design, acreage, however you measure a town, how do we compare for the amount of panels that are already on the ground and in the town compared to other towns?
I don't know. Maybe one of the two gentlemen to my right could help you on that.
I think I can maybe provide a little bit of context. Again, my name is Eric Graber Lopez with Blue Wave. There are roughly 70,000 or 72,000 solar installations in the state, adding up to about 1,700 megawatts today. That has been growing at a fairly steady rate. I understand there are 3 facilities in Wareham today. Ground mounted. How many?
About 8.
8. And how many megawatts?
More than megawatts, how about acreage?
Well, I want to convert it. Roughly a megawatt, depending on the type of the angle of the soil,
Yeah,
would be between 4 and 5 acres per megawatt.
okay.
The question earlier about a quarter of a megawatt would be maybe a little bit less than an acre of land. And again, that depends entirely on the slope of the property.
Something less than 10.
Less than 10 megawatts? So it's a fairly small percentage of what's in the state. A large portion of the development has occurred in central and western Massachusetts.
Yeah.
The South Coast has some developments. We have had some developments in the South Coast region, in Fairhaven, New Bedford, Mattapoisett, Rochester, and they've been in the range of 2 to 4 megawatts on average. And if I may just say something, there's something that was mentioned that I think I agree completely with, and it's good fences make good neighbors. At the end of the day, our business is one of partnerships. We're a Massachusetts-based company, and what we do is we build partnerships with our host communities and our customers, who tend to be the very residents of those communities. And the best way and the only way that we typically will be able to serve our communities and our customers is to do things the right way. To work with the communities, with the towns, with the neighbors, to find out what are the sensitivities, what is the best approach to developing responsibly. Because I really think, and we believe, that you best manage what you control. And by having policies that call for review and for constructive discussion, you get the results that you want, rather than people trying to circumvent. And we've been a participant in the industry since it roughly started in Massachusetts for about the last 7 years. And we're working with about 10% of the municipalities in Massachusetts today. We take our job very seriously. At the end of the day, our most important reference is going to be our most dissatisfied customer. And customers are towns, the buyers of the net metering credits, the landowners, the government agencies and the utilities. Everybody carries weight and is important, and nobody takes precedence in this process. It's the only way you actually build a lasting business. We're from here. We're staying here in Massachusetts. This is our hometown. Virtually all of our employees are from Massachusetts. So I just wanted to add, that I think that this is a really important discussion, and because I agree completely that just like a house can be built in a way that is not suitable for a particular area, or with materials and with components that are not suitable, so can a solar project, so can anything.
I think the issue for me is, the way I look at it is, I was for solar. As a matter of fact, Mr. Cirque probably brought the first project before me. But the more I see, the less I like it. So the way I look at it is, and I'm going to completely disagree with you, Mr. Cirque, right now. I think our residential property that's still natural should be protected for future growth residentially for families to move to this community. It may not happen in my lifetime, may not happen for 100 years. But I feel that solar is not necessarily a good neighbor, and I'm going to tell you why I think that. Once we give up our residential properties that are natural now, there could be future developments for families. The solar comes in, they rape the property completely. They put up their panels, they fence it off. It is not attractive. It does not bode well for families moving to the community, because they're not going to want to live near them necessarily. I don't see any benefits for the town. I see the benefits for you, where the residents of Wareham are benefiting by you putting, raping 50 acres of land and putting in solar panels. I'm sure you can maybe explain how that is beneficial to me, but I don't see it yet. I also am concerned, Wareham is a town with a lot of natural resources and a lot of animals and the like that have migration paths and things of that nature, and a facility like you put up changes that. And so I don't feel that the benefit of the solar panels for the power outweighs that. And then, Mr. Cirque, you mentioned the BDOT, and that's long before I moved to this town, but as far as I can see, the BDOT was a horrendous failure. It was supposed to be one type of use and developed a certain way from what I've been told, and we have completely seen something very different. So I don't see solar panels even in the BDOT as a benefit to the community, although I know that there are some now. So I, for one, am just not necessarily in favor of what you do any longer. If it was up to me, I would require you to put it in the industrial areas, on the industrial buildings, and figure out how to make money that way. I think that would be your charge. Those buildings are already pre-existing. There's many of them. If you can put solar panels on all those roofs, I don't know how many square feet that is, but it's a lot. I know one of our applicants recently said he has 1 million square feet under roof. I don't know how many acres that is, but that's a lot of roof. So I would prefer to see you work with those people and put your panels on their roofs, where the property's already been built out. It's not going to be visible to residential neighbors. It is not going to rape our natural resources. And that's pretty much what I have to say. And Mr. Cirque, I'm sure, will respond.
Yeah, I think that you have to, Mr. Fitzgerald, keep in mind the state statute, which shows a solicitude, a partial exemption for solar facilities. And so if you ban it...
I'm not saying ban it. Well, you have 1 million square feet of industrial space. Put your panels on them. My opinion is that Wareham must be somewhere in the middle or the higher end of where solar panels are currently existing. I mean, if you go back to towns like Braintree, you said you work in 10% of the towns. Give me some of the towns like Milton and Braintree where you're putting solar panels up.
Well, we're not working in either of those towns.
Give me an example of a town that's similar to those where you can put panels up. And then why can't you do the same here?
I think probably the best example will be in Dover, where we just commissioned a system in the Hale Reservation on the landfill.
Okay.
And in terms of the use of the land, I think one of the defining characteristics of the use of land for solar is, putting aside for a second the value that it brings, which I can speak to a little bit, is these are temporary facilities. A solar facility is not meant to forever be a solar facility. You know,
Right.
one of the benefits of developing any particular site as a solar facility is that at the end of that initial term, the parties can decide that there's a better alternative use for that land, unlike putting up a factory or a warehouse or a power plant. Solar facilities are immovable. They don't move. There are no moving parts. Inverters and transformers, they do hum a little bit. The sound doesn't travel that far. There's a lot of sound studies about this stuff, and it's all about, again, best practices in the industry, not going for the lowest cost practices, but actually doing what's best for the circumstances in a particular project. But solar, at the end of the day, is actually becoming more of a compatible use, say, with agriculture. In Europe and in parts of the United States, including Massachusetts, there's a great move for mixed use of agricultural land that would otherwise be fallow and uneconomic given commodity prices, to supplement income for farmers and landowners from the benefits from solar. You know, there are, and I'll speak a little bit to the economic
But
benefit.
that's land that's already been raped, and the living creatures have been pretty much pushed aside, I would assume, if it's a farm.
Well, the living creatures that were there before will likely still be there. There is access for turtles or other animals that will live in the area, will continue to live in the area. I mean, there are fairly strict restrictions around natural habitats. That is not something that any development can actually circumvent. As a matter of fact, the rules in Massachusetts are very strict in that regard. But again, the beauty to these things is always in the details. The devil's in the details, right? Is are you complying simply with the letter, or are you complying with the spirit? And I think where you distinguish a good participant versus a bad participant is those who actually are working to do things within the construct of the spirit. And in terms of financial benefit, I mean, there are generally 4 forms of benefit to people in general. Number 1, you're right. This is a business. We develop projects to generate our profit. If we didn't generate profits, we would not be able to develop projects. More importantly, I mean, we're a mission-driven business. There are, as I'm sure most of you know and have read, there are a lot easier ways to make money in the world than in the solar industry. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of work to get these projects done well. But the benefits are important. Number 1, landowners benefit from the use and rental of land that is otherwise generally not utilized. Subsequent to that, there's a benefit to the municipalities within which we work of property taxes, whether that be through a pilot agreement or the actual issuance of property tax payments, which are not insubstantial. There's a wide range of outcome based on the mill rates by town. So there isn't a statewide standard treatment for property taxes. So comparing one town to another is a little tricky. Also, because of the decline in costs of the systems over time, it's hard to make kind of that 4th dimension comparison over time. But there's a significant amount of value that is generated for communities from property taxes. The flip side of the added value from property taxes is that there's very little use of town resources. We don't use the police department. We don't use the school department, the fire department. And so, and the aggregate is a net positive. So those are the first two. The third one, which is, at the end of the day, one of the big drivers of why we're in this business is the communities within which we work, those very residents actually benefit. Because what we tend to develop is what are called community solar projects, which will have two kinds of customers. There will typically be either, the host municipality or public agencies will sign up to buy net metering credits, and then homeowners in the town or the neighboring towns will sign up as subscribers under the very same terms. And so, one of the things that we actually sought to develop was a way to actually bring benefit to the towns within which we work, for that very reason. Because I don't think, and I really mean this, I don't think there is, it's one thing or the other. There is no reason why we should try to figure out how to counterbalance the interests. It's about finding the kind of the maximizing and optimizing for everybody. Because there's a way for us to do our work, to do it well, and to benefit the communities that host us and our customers. And what is happening more often than not is those are now the same. The majority of the customers in a lot of our community solar facilities are within the very towns which we serve. And this is, probably, I think, the single most important driver for us in this business is to help the towns where we work. And this is without even talking about the environmental benefits. I mean, I think, there's plenty of research that folks can read, and I'm not a scientist, but we believe in what we're doing. But we also believe that we have to do things the right way. So when I hear your concerns, I don't like to hear the people talk like that, because I don't like to see other players in the industry do things the wrong way. I think there's a right way of doing this and a wrong way of doing this. And we do things the right way. I'd encourage you guys to talk to any of the towns within.
May I ask
Sorry.
What does your company do?
So we do two things. We are a development company. So we're developers. We develop the solar
Real estate
projects.
developers.
We identify a piece of property, seek permits to develop it.
Yeah. For what purpose?
For solar projects,
Strictly.
strictly solar.
How do you render the service or product?
I'm sorry?
How do you render your service or product?
Our service for the homeowners
How
in
do
the
you
towns?
To whom?
To homeowners, small businesses, and municipalities who buy the output from those facilities through long-term contracts.
You own the assets.
Yes. We own some of them we don't. What we'll do is we typically develop, build, and manage over the life of the contract. We actually manage the relationships with the customers. So we negotiate and acquire the contracts with the larger customers, as well as with the individual homeowners and small businesses.
How do you interact with a single homeowner?
That single homeowner signs a contract with us that entitles them to a portion of the output of the facility, and they get that benefit on their bill from NSTAR. They get credits every month on their bill from
you get the
NSTAR.
tax credits, or the homeowner gets a portion of the tax credit?
We get the tax credits to build the facility, and that is part of what allows us to sell its output at a discount. One of the kind of really interesting things about solar, so I said there's 72,000 installations in Massachusetts, right? There's 1.2 million single-family homes in Massachusetts, plus a very large number of apartments. Over 80% of homeowners and renters, they can't put solar on their rooftops.
Right. They cannot?
They can't, because either the rooftop is not suitable, it's shaded, it's angled in the wrong direction. They don't have the money.
Right.
They don't have the ability to use the tax credits. So what we do is we actually take off the table that concern and then bring the savings without the need for actually having people have to worry about putting solar panels on the roof. And we do that in a more cost-effective fashion than putting solar on a rooftop, which tends to be a lot more expensive than working on a rooftop.
Fairhaven project and Plimpton project are
Um,
examples.
You know,
Yeah.
it's all very articulate in your presentation, and the words make sense, and we all recognize that there is a benefit to be gained. But I was taken aback by Mr. Sharkey's comment that, at least the way I heard it, that what effectively you're asking us to change the zoning from residential to industrial. And in a way, I heard you usurping residential use. And that's what not troubles me greatly, but somewhat, that a residential community requires a certain scale and where people recognize their neighbors, their structures. And I think, at least speaking for myself, effective as it is, a solar installation has nothing to do with a residential environment. Yes, you're entitled to pursue the business and to provide the power, and we'd love to help, but the idea that it is appropriate to put it in residential areas, Mr. Sharkey, I find very troubling.
Well,
And I will take on, I mean, the state be damned. Are they going to force us to change our zoning? Fine, let them come on, take us on. Excuse me, I don't mean to get us into a fight, but it doesn't make sense.
Regarding this, right now, we have nothing in place to prevent projects from showing up, which is the reason for this
Right.
proposal. I think the reason they talk about the R130 is precisely what they illustrated. That's where our agricultural uses are. I can speak to the water department facility, and that's, I would say, 99.9% of the people don't even know it's there. But it's buffered by protected property that the water department owns. If we could build those kind of safeguards that you could cookie cutter with, which, that's the detail we gotta work out. But if you could build in that kind of application, so you wouldn't have them showing up on Toby Road and, 50 feet from
Half the way.
Again, slapped right up against a residential. If you could put those kind of safeties in where most people wouldn't even know they were there, I think, but I don't know how to verbalize that. How do we put that on paper?
You can do that with any industrial use. If you want to put a factory out in the middle of 500 acres, nobody's going to know what's there.
Mhm.
So my opinion is, I think the residential property should be protected, and I think solar should not be allowed.
If I would ask, is there a solar facility in the town of Wareham that you do not regard as offensive? For example, is the facility off of Charlotte Furnace Road,
That's
behind it, which is quite a ways from the road?
That's offensive.
Well, you can,
Offensive?
but you can see it still.
The
I mean,
the one on Chad's Pond Road, like Mike said earlier, is probably the best solar site that's been put in town so far. That's on your client's property. The berms are there, it's in place, it's in a good place.
And what makes that non-offensive?
Well, it's buffered, it's away from residential, there's residential across, but it's quite a ways away.
That's exactly what I've been saying, Mr. Baptiste, that if your bylaw focuses on setbacks
Well,
from residential structures and buffers,
I think
then
the
you
thing-
can distinguish between the good and the bad.
The thing is, we're trying to put something in place, and I feel pretty intimidated the way, with your presentation. In other words, you're telling us, hey, you do it this way, or, we're gonna go to the state, basically, and do what we wanna do. We wanna have the knowledge to make the right decision for what's right for the town. I think that's what the majority of the board, how we feel. And that's, I think, the action we should go. We need more information to make a decision. If you're gonna go for major surgery, do you go for one opinion or two?
Well, I've urged you to look as many bylaws as possible to get the best from all of them. But all I'm saying is that you yourself, Mr. Baptiste, said that there's a facility that, because of its remote location and its protective buffers, is not offensive. Well, shouldn't your bylaw be designed to encourage those as opposed to prohibiting all?
Well, I wanna make sure there's no loopholes in here, so something doesn't slip between the cracks.
Sure.
Let us do our job. I think we identified, we have an issue, we have a problem, we have to do something with it. We have to be educated to do it the right way,
Yeah.
instead of just react.
Sure.
And the thing is, I don't like to be intimidated, and I don't like to be pushed in the corner, jump. I've been in that situation many times in my life.
There's something to be said, though, for what Mr. Cirque is talking about. And it goes right along with what, Mike, what you've been talking about, too, in the proximity to residential areas. The 3 facilities with which I have had some contact, 4, take it back, Squirrel Island Road, off Hathaway, and 2 on County. The one that is furthest down on County Road is built in an old stump dump, which you can't see at all from anywhere. The second one on County Road is probably the largest of the ones, excluding the Makepeace property. It's built in an old sand pit, most of which is below the grade of the surrounding ground. When that particular facility was built, the people that did it went to the neighbors, and they basically discussed the property with the neighbors, what they were going to do. Buffers were put around that, and they worked with the neighbors because they were happy. When I went out to inspect that particular site, it was probably one of the cleanest, neatest projects that you've got in town. That one you cannot see from County Road, for the most part. I think if you look in the road, you might possibly see the top of a few panels, but
little
you
bit of
can't
it,
see the
sure,
entire
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
The one on Squirrel Island Road is pretty well hid from everything. That's in an old gravel pit, regardless of its neatness and so forth, of what may be there at the present time. It's
Can
been a
it be
while since
seen
I've
by
seen
the
it.
residents that it backs up to?
They are behind residents, but there was some vegetation built into that one. All the residents that were there were very well aware of what was going to happen, and certain buffering was put in place between them and that facility, which again is below grade. The one that's on Hathaway is an entirely different situation, and speaks more, I think, of all of them to what your concern is, Mike, and I would agree with you 100%, that it's way too close to the people that are living there. And it speaks to what Mr. Cirque is talking about in terms of building in buffers that are substantial enough, not only buffers this way, but buffers this way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at the topography of the land, if you've got a house that's sitting here and you're putting a solar farm down here where they can look right directly down into it, that's not necessarily very good. But if the contours of the ground were evaluated enough so you can tell what the visual impacts are going to be, that's important. I think the one you're talking about, Mike, probably takes that into consideration more than anything else, although I think the developer there probably had an advantage in having so much land around him that he could change the grade and do whatever he wanted to build those buffers. But I think it does speak a lot to the advantage of making sure that whatever's in the bylaw really takes into account the visual effects now and in the future. And I think that there's a certain point to be made here about that strip commercial zone. The strip commercial zone, for a part of it, is 500 feet from Cranberry Highway in both directions. But once you get down past the bypass, that zone reduces to 200 feet. You can't put any solar farm in that strip commercial district that won't be
Right.
seen from Route 28.
Right.
Impossible. It's all developed now anyway. You can't put anything more in there.
Charlie, was Squirrel Island residential zoned, or?
It's an MR30 zone, I think. As a matter of fact,
That was approved by zoning,
all
right?
4 of them are MR30. So they are in residential zones. However, they were in places that were already reworked or worked for something else. An old sand pit, The stump dump in one case, the only one that was strip clean was the one that was off Hathaway. The old one that's off Squirrel Island, that was an old gravel pit. So they were placed in areas where it made sense to utilize an already, I'll call it destroyed piece of land for the lack of a better name. So I think location is important. Setbacks are clearly important. And I think that it makes some sense to think again about restricting it to simply those industrial complexes, or certainly the Marine District isn't big enough to host anything. And if you want to reserve that for marine uses, which I think was the intent of that bylaw in the first place, you don't want a solar farm in any of it. So I think it could use a little bit of additional thought as to where these should go and what the underlying criteria should be. Notwithstanding what you say, Mike, about rooftop. The only thing that I question about that a little bit would be how you would work with the owners of currently existing facilities, unless, such as these gentlemen come in and they can market their product and convince that business owner to put some solar panels on his roof. I don't know how you work that into a bylaw. How you force
Well,
an industrial property that's already
Building
built.
mounted is a function of the building code and the electrical code. So we don't really have any jurisdiction with the zoning bylaw on that.
Well, that's my point. How would you put into a bylaw, which you're dealing with now, the idea of restructuring the industrial zone, which is basically built out? How you do that in such a way that it becomes a zoning regulation? I don't see how you could do it.
I have to go in agreement with you, Mike, and here's the things that we can't recapture. I'm not 100% buying that this can be repurposed 5 years, 10 years from now. Once you're granted the permission to make this a solar farm, unless you make it fail, I'm not sure we're gonna be able to retract that back from you. What we can't recreate is 100 years of growth on a piece of property. If it's a stump dump, if it's a gravel pit, if it's in a residential zoning, that might be some consideration. But it doesn't solve the neighbor issue. And I'll tell you, my brother lives out in the Berkshires. He's converting his properties, 3 properties out there, to solar farms. This is going to create a whirlwind of objection from abutters for you. I know this for a fact. I mean, watching what he went out there. But I look at what he's doing out there on a per capita population to land use. You've got an infinity of mountain ranges and unused farmland out there that can be converted. We've got a pretty dense population in a small geographical area here. And if there has to be a cap on this, because if we don't set a cap in saying that we'll stop at 1,000 acres, or we'll stop at 100 megawatts, what'll end up happening is we'll end up giving too much away that can't be converted back. We won't see 100 years of growth come back in our lifetime, probably not even in our kids' lifetime. I am so upset right now with how the power company wiped out Toby Road there, in which we will look at a chain link fence there unless you guys are going to tell me something different. Because they wiped out every piece of growth on that property right now because of an exemption that's over and over for utility companies. So the other concern is I don't totally buy into the dollar for dollar exchange. If you look at an acre and a half of property that builds 3,000 square feet of home that employs 2 working adults in there earning 6-figure incomes, and the tax coming in from the residential property and the income tax coming in from the residents of that home, I think exceed any dollar value that converting that to 4 or 5 acres of solar is going to feed into our tax base. So those are the types of things that I don't think have been proven to us as totally beneficial. A reduction in power, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, every power company can give more credit out to every one of these building owners that own an Amazon building to put solar panels on the top. Those are the folks that are making the money off of this entire process. So do I agree with solar panels on the side of ski slopes where land has already been barrened and doesn't have a huge impact? I don't object to that as much, but the town of Wareham,
is, you know, is somewhat industrialized, is more of a bedroom community. We need to be balanced somewhere between Nantucket and Boston, you know, and how we do business. We're always the first to concede in taking in commercial opportunities here, but then we gotta live with the consequences of that. And I don't wanna, this is just me personally, I don't wanna hastily make a decision until someone shows us the economical value and the ecological impact. Because at heart, we are an agricultural community. We yield more off of agricultural here than any other portion of Massachusetts. And that goes for Plymouth and Carver and, you know, Rochester and the surrounding towns. So, you know, there's no trees for the birds to build nests in under a solar panel. I don't know how you're answering that one. You know, the disturbance of the energy with the ecosystem.
You talk about the agriculture, and, you know, this is another way for agriculture to be more viable. Rather than, for example, stripping the earth with earth removal.
That's a sore subject, don't even go there, George.
You know,
That's so they can maintain whatever they're
You
doing,
know,
maintain the
but-
agriculture. That's something else that has to be addressed.
but that's how you, but that's one of the tools in the box of agriculture, is how to stay profitable. If this is a method to stay profitable without changing the elevations of the universe.
There's a, if I could add just, is it okay if I just add a couple of comments? I wanted to clarify, when I meant temporary use of the land, it wasn't 5 or 10 years. What I meant is that the facilities typically have a useful life of 20 to 30 years. And at that point, what will likely happen is the facilities are removed. There's no, after 20 or 30 years, that facility and the obligation typically with the landowner, when you lease the land, is you're obligated to remove and restore to its original condition. I mean, that's, in our contracts with municipalities, our contracts with private sector, that's one of the main conditions in the land leases. So it's our obligation, you have to post decommissioning bonds at times, some other form of assurance, to ensure that actually happens. In terms of the economic benefit, it's not really a question of either or, they're complementary goods. I mean, there are pieces of property that are not necessarily going to be developed as residential, that were used as farmland at one point, are no longer as productive as they used to be, and the dual use of solar with agriculture becomes attractive for the landowners. A lot of the land that we have developed is actually fallow land, fallow agricultural land, not clear cutting or anything like that. It's, landfill, some landfills, some, I'll give you an example where one of the places where we actually did cut some trees was in Rochester. Next to the water treatment plant, there had been an infestation of the beetles, an Asian beetle that was damaging the trees. We worked with EPA, DEP, the city of New Bedford that owns the property, and the town of Rochester to put a plan in place to clear the damaged property, put a solar facility there that actually supplies all of the energy for the water treatment plant that benefits the region. We made use of berms. There's across the street on North Road, there's residences. You can't see anything. I mean, this facility, we worked with, like I said, the land is, it's an awkward, a strange situation because the city of New Bedford owns the land in the town of Rochester. So we ended up working with both the town and the city, the EPA and the DEP to come up with a plan for this. And the idea is always around responsible development. Sometimes trees will be cut. I mean, that's sometimes, but it's not simple clear cutting of trees. That's not the kind of development that we pursue. I mean, we try to find land that is otherwise not suitable for a lot of other things, and then work with the landowners to make those projects happen. But we very much see what we do as a complement.
No, but I think that through bylaws, we can control some of that process to make a decision on the land is not suitable for any other purpose other than this, and there will be no clear cutting with that. you know, whether that land in New Bedford, was that residentially zoned, or was it
In Rochester?
in Rochester, commercially zoned?
Off the top of my head, I can't recall. You know, at the end of the day, what we try to do is work with the landowners and the towns to figure out what makes the most sense and what type of development makes the most sense.
You see, my consideration of being a residential property owner, there's so many considerations. That gravel pit off of Squirrel Island Road, that's opposite my road off of Blackmore Pond, you know, the probability of that ever being developed was slim to none.
Right.
Right? I bought that piece of land knowing nothing else could go up. And the worst case scenario is a house could go up. Not that it would be rezoned.
But
and-
there
and
was a,
commercially used.
there was a 8-lot subdivision approved for that property.
Yeah.
And it was, if the housing market hadn't crashed, there'd be 8 houses there.
And I would have been fine with that, knowing that it remained a residential neighborhood.
I'm talking off County Road.
Yeah, off of Squirrel Island. But I think this is a healthy debate.
Yeah.
This is what every community needs to be talking about. It is a pressing issue for the future. I'll go back to both Mike and Emmanuel. We just need to be better educated. I'm not taking a hard no position on anything, but as responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars in this town, it doesn't have an economic effect, does it have a ecological effect? Does it have a community effect? Because at some point, families don't move in and we don't build up our tax base that way because we've converted 15% of our residential property to.
Could I ask one more question of the professionals here?
Sure.
What does the technology look like for the future? As if we've looked at telephones,
Yep.
they've gone from this big to this big.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
What's the future look for cell panels?
That's a really great question. I'll answer that question and then something around land use in terms of percentages that I wanted to highlight. Solar panel technology is kind of near the cap of efficiency at this point. You know, the first solar panels went up in that were installed in a building, actually in Beverly, here in Massachusetts, almost 40 years ago, on a school, and they're still operating today. You know, they've had to replace some parts. It was part of a test, and they're still operating quietly. Nobody knows they're there. The panels are standard size. Improvement is in small, itsy bitsy increments on an annual basis. The improvements, what they tend to mean is that it reduces the cost of developing a little bit, but these days the vast majority of the cost of a project is the actual soft and civil costs. The equipment costs are actually have reached, you know, kind of a plateau. Efficiencies now come from being smarter and more efficient in how you build. Not necessarily because of efficiency gains or equipment costs. But so efficiency improvements have kind of tailed off over the last couple of years. There will always be little bits here or there.
I think what Mr. Rowley is questioning is whether or not in the future the same amount of energy can be generated from smaller panels.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. It would not be a material change 10 years from now or 20 years from now. It might be 5% less, 5 percentage points.
Okay.
Mark,
at most.
is there any
Yeah.
effort being made to design building materials to be absorbent?
That's
Roof shingles, for
yeah.
example.
So there's a company doing that today. The problem with that kind of product is what makes solar efficient from a financial standpoint and a development standpoint is standardization. When you have standards and you have standard equipment, standard connectors, standard wires, standard procedures for building, they're easier to police, to regulate, to control, and to manage, and to own, and to monitor. When you put shingles in different shapes from different manufacturers, installation companies that don't know what they're doing, that's when you start running into problems because you remove, in essence, it becomes mass customization. Everything is bespoke. And that creates problems for the industry. That takes you back 10 years ago. And that's, you know, the buyer of a shingle roof installation for their own house is a person who would buy a Mercedes-Benz. You know, these are premium products. that will likely never be accessible to the typical homeowner.
They exist today.
They exist in very early versions.
Right,
They
right.
just started Tesla, the company that makes the electric cars, just started selling those. I think about a month ago, and the only installations are for employees right now. Around the question of land use, it's really important. So about this, of the 1,700 megawatts that are installed in Massachusetts today, that represents less than 1% of the land mass of the state. I mean, we're
In the new program is an additional 1,600 megawatts.
Yeah.
So you're talking,
1.5% of the land mass of the state in aggregate. And this is assuming that everything that is built on land. Between 20 and 30% of that is built on residential rooftops. So all of a sudden now you're taking the residential rooftops and you're putting those aside. Those aren't using land. So you go from 0.75% of the land potentially being used for the 1,700 megawatts to more like 0.5%. What there is, they are visible because they're new. You notice them the way 20 years ago people noticed cell towers. Now cell towers go on buildings, they go on the highways. People ignore that. I'm not comparing that. I'm just simply, there's a newness to it, and also a way of doing things responsibly. Some cell towers are developed responsibly. They look like trees. They're well situated. Some others are not. And in anything, I think there is a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. This for us is also a process of education. We really appreciate being able to sit here with you to talk about these things, because these are important topics. And it's important for us to hear the concerns that our communities and our current host communities and our potential host communities have, so we can work better together. I don't, this is not, and these aren't just words. I highly encourage you, as you said, to talk to the other towns and to towns with whom we've worked, for example, and how we have lived up to the things that we said we would do. Because these are temporary assets, but they'll be here once installed 20 to 30 years, and then they are removed. Because we can't, for example, unilaterally, we typically can't just say, oh, we're going to leave it there. We need, the landowner needs to agree, get to have somebody to commercially agree to buy the output. It's a whole food chain of events, daisy chain of events that needs to occur.
Well, remove based on the economics at the time. If 30 years from now, it's economical to restore them and do another 20-year lease, that's what'll happen.
No, at that point, what you might do is actually you just leave them. If that was the case, so that it's still economical to use it, and if all parties are interested in continuing, you just extend. You would, a solar farm is ultimately a piece of equipment that will operate as long as it's well taken care of. It will never really make sense to just tear down something that's there to put up a new one. That's just not, it's not really the best use of capital, and it's not the best use of the land. Also with utilities, it's actually really difficult to do something like that, because you'd have to restart the entire utility interconnection process. And the rules change over time, the way the output is calculated.
Well, I didn't mean remove it and put another one. I'm just, if it was feasible, you would just renew the lease.
If everybody agrees that it's a good idea.
If it's financially the right thing to do.
Yeah, but that would also involve, that would mean, more property taxes, it would mean more rent, and it would mean more benefit to the customers.
I'd like to point out that right now, every one of those every one of those items in that row is special permit by Zoning Board of Appeals.
That was going to be my next point. To do nothing, we can get everything thrown at us at this point. To tweak this a little bit, we can have some regulation.
And the question is, what do you want to tweak in it? We have standards for buffers. We can improve those. We can make them stronger. What kind of information would you like to have as a board to?
Don't say to depend on the state to back us up, because we can't trust them, that's for sure. I said, don't say that the state's gonna come up with bylaws and things that protect us, because
It's a local, it's a local
we don't
task.
trust the state.
I think that what you're hearing, though, from this side of the table, is that we're more than happy to work with you to try to come up with something that can meet the needs of both parties, if that's possible. It's not as though we're here to take pot shots at a proposed bylaw. What we're here to do is to say that the bylaw that's being proposed, as we see it, is too blunt an instrument to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And we're more than happy to work with you to try to come up with something that's more sophisticated and more directed at the evil you're trying to prevent.
Would you suggest some things?
We could.
We could.
Come on our side of the table.
One thing I would suggest is, one of the best things to do is to actually take a look at these. There are, like I said, there's good projects and there's bad projects, and I think here you have a sampling of both. Of what has been developed, there's some projects that clearly didn't meet expectations, and some that have been done very well. I think the idea and the understanding that agricultural use and renewable energy use, in particular solar, is compatible is an important concept. Here in the U.S., that's becoming much more of a common dual use, because it makes for good business for landowners. It supplements the revenues from their farm. It takes away some of the seasonality and takes away some of the exposure from cost in fuel, cost in equipment, insurance, from weather, and from crop prices. So the use of R60 and R130, which is what tends to be more farmland, is an area I think where it's worthwhile to explore, with really good boundaries around what are the design standards.
Yep.
The good design standards I think are really one of the tools that is best suited for achieving the town's goals, and while still deriving the benefit from these projects. And in terms of the details, I mean, I think like you guys, I'd love to sit down, maybe give some more serious thought, talk to our development team, share some experiences that we've had with other towns in our development timeline, and then come back and present us, rather than on the spot just tell you, oh yeah, I don't have a wish list. We didn't come here with a wish list. We came here to share some of our experiences and listen, and more importantly, listen to what you guys are saying. And so, but we'd be more than glad to come back and give you some feedback.
Maybe a way to do that would be if a subcommittee of your board could meet with us in a series of meetings, we could, through site visits and through suggestions, come up with a more finely tuned bylaw that would meet your objectives as well as those of the developer community. Just a thought.
Schedule.
Alan?
I've listened all through this. I've gone, actually at the state level, down to here, with the projects, with the different, credits, SREC credits, et cetera. The simple statement is that solar power doesn't help us financially. We all pay for it. It's all subsidized, number one. The increased rates is basically what we get hit with at the end of the day, because it costs the electric companies, everybody pays more. So it's not like a panacea. All it is going away from basically fossil fuels, which is eventually going to be a problem to another source of electricity. Without the subsidies, this wouldn't exist. The developers wouldn't even be in it because they do the project, they build it, and they're out and gone. Usually as soon as the project's done, they've made their money and on to the next one. So this isn't, a gift. 20 years from now, if we have to have the solar panels removed, where are you going to put them? Where are you going to dispose them to? How's that going to happen? There's no thought process in this at all. That's just basic things. What I'm concerned about is we have a master plan that we're about to do. We've got a lot of flack in the last week with what happened on Toby Road. The town is extremely upset. We're getting a lot of calls from the administration level because of this project. I don't want to see anything really happen until we figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what the town wants to be. We have the right to set our own rules and regulations. It doesn't matter what the state says. The state has a program that it wants to develop solar, and it has a goal of how many megawatts it generates. And they've had a program with Duval and now with Baker. It's all out there. But it's up to us as a group. I think it's critical that we sit there and look at all the different pieces of this and put something together that actually works for the town, where this particular board has the ability to pick and choose how it goes together. Every piece of property has a different plus and minus, and unfortunately, there's no law that you can put together that's going to allow that to work right unless the board has control. So I don't have to be a special permit. I'm not sure what we're going to end up doing at this board itself, not the ZBA. But it's a real problem, and right now where we're at is not there. We're not going to be able to put something together for the fall town meeting, unfortunately, that's going to be correct. It's going to have problems. It needs to get done, but it needs to follow whatever our master plan is going to be. We have to have a plan of how this town goes forward. And solar energy, we've already gone through wind power, and that's turned out to be a fiasco for most places because of all the different pieces. The public is just completely against it. It's almost impossible. It's much easier to do solar right now because it's easy sell. But again, at the end of the day, we're all paying more for our electricity because it's all based on the cost of electric companies. And solar power doesn't cost less than generated by fossil fuels. It's a simple fact of life. So it's not an end solution. Probably 20 years from now, there'll be a whole different thing here. For someone to tell me that the solar panels won't be replaced with something else more efficient, I don't believe it. Things in 5 years' time frame, the whole world changes these days. 20 years from now, none of this is going to exist. So I'm asking this board from the administration side to put something together that's going to work for the town and for the residents, because right now, just putting something in place is not going to work. And these projects don't save us money and time in the long run. The pilot project money we get, and I'll look at Toby Road as an example, there's much better use of that property commercially than what's being used now. I can tell you that the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen are extremely unhappy with that project. We think that was one of the most foolish things to have done in this town. With all the development in West Wareham there, in that area, that's a waste of land. And that's all I have to say.
Well, as we said, to do nothing means we'll get more bad projects.
Right.
We don't control the financial aspects of solar funding or anything else, so we just have to live with it. And so if there's something we can do to salvage this and make it I won't say salvage, but something to make it agreeable to the board and give us something, at least some sort of regulation over what comes in front of us, I think that's necessary. But again, I see some issues with, I think that the chart should be flipped and the special permits on this end and the no's on that end, but.
I 100% disagree,
Mhm.
just for the record. That chart looks good to me right now.
Again, it's up to the whole board here to figure it out.
Mhm. You got
Right,
what?
so right now, you guys aren't throwing anything at us? This was all just
No.
an information session, right?
We're going over the solar bylaw,
All right.
and they were here as a resource.
You're getting a project from them, you know that.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
You're getting a project from this sooner or later.
Yeah.
The Charge Pond Road, which I assume is the buying land for Makepeace, you're buying or leasing land for Makepeace, correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear
You were buying or leasing land for Makepeace from Charge Pond?
No.
Where's the land coming from you're getting on Charge Pond Road?
It's,
Who owns it?
Hi, I'm Lexi. I'm the project manager for the project. It's 3 landowners. It's over near the 80 Makepeace land, cranberry bogs. They're cranberry farmers.
You have to
You
come
have to
forward
come
there,
up.
please.
Sorry.
Gotta be on record.
Hi.
Please introduce yourself also.
Should we be discussing this tonight? Aren't we supposed to be going over the solar bylaw?
Yeah, but it's sitting here in the list of stuff that Ken submitted.
Oh.
I'm not asking about the project per se, I'm just curious.
My name's Lexi, I'm with Blue Wave. The project is close to the 80 Makepeace areas of land that they own. It's other cranberry farmers in town, Bayside Agricultural, Surecran Services, and Dave Fletcher.
Okay. This is a question for the basic project itself. Who do you intend to sell the power to? Directly to Eversource or what?
These projects generate net metering credits, and then we would sell those net metering credits to customers.
What customers?
Well, as I mentioned before, typically it would be large anchor tenants, and it's part of our community solar effort. So, you know, housing authorities or...
As an example, the town of Wareham has purchased a while ago 6 megawatts of credit. Basically, every time we turn around, we found more ways to be efficient. 6 megawatts we purchased, now we're using all of it. We can't buy any more because we won't be able to use the credits.
Okay.
So for the town of Wareham, whatever you generate is of no use to us. The town of Wareham also is in the process of doing combining, basically consolidating, buying electricity for all the residents at a lower rate.
Mm-hmm.
We have a program coming through the next month or so.
Yeah, community aggregation.
That's right.
Yep, so... it's
So
interesting
all I'm saying is that that particular rate, you know, may not have any advantages to our residents either.
So that's community aggregation is actually complementary to net metering, because what community aggregation does, as you know, it just allows homeowners, residents of the town, to benefit from the town's ability to sign more attractive contracts. That's kind of the basic.
We're part of a regional group of about 20 communities
Right.
on this program.
The purchase of net metering credits, what it does, it actually allows the buyers of those credits to pay their bill with those credits. So typically what we'll do is a homeowner's bill or a business bill would be $100. We'll sell them $100 worth of credits for less than $100. So they can get the savings from the aggregation, and they can also get the savings from buying the net metering credits to pay those bills.
Are you sure about that?
I am 100% sure about that. That is actually the very basis of net metering, is that it is not a power transaction. It's what's considered by FERC a retail transaction. So we don't sell electricity. We sell, I think really the best way to think about the product of these solar farms is we sell gift cards to pay utility bills at a discount. You know, if in a kind of conceptually, that's probably the best way to think about it.
So you're going to work individually with residents all over the towns?
That's what we do. We manage. So we manage.
I'm a customer.
We're wandering away from the solar bylaw here.
I apologize. I just want to make sure that...
Decision of whether
understood.
solar fields are going to exist are not going to happen in this room.
Nope. I'm
And
done.
how they're subsidized and when and where, it'll come from our pockets, but not from this board. What we need to do is protect, and, you know, if these things are going to move forward, we've got to have them so it's palatable. So do you have the proposed buffers on your, is that the next step in the presentation?
Yeah, I can go to the buffers. These are the design standards under section 594. And for large ground-mounted solar energy facilities, it's going to be 3 acres in size and meet the design guidelines for industrial uses, which have greater setbacks than commercial or residential. And when the project abuts or is across the street from a residential district or residential development, that the front yard setback and vegetated buffer increases to 50 feet, and the side yard also increases to 50 feet. And the rear yard increases to 50 feet. Now, you could ask for greater setbacks than that.
Much greater. Much, much greater.
1,500.
That's a good number. No, I mean, realistically,
If a front yard setback is the same as what's in Article 6, that means that in a residential zone or any of these other zones, the strip commercial, for example, could be 20 feet.
Right,
That's not anywhere near enough.
no. No. I mean, I don't know what is appropriate,
Landscaping
but
all you want, and you're never going to
buffer
make
that.
it disappear. It
Right.
won't happen.
Can't
Yeah.
build a wall high
I like Carver's suggestion of 200 feet minimum as a starting standard.
And I will go
But,
back to
but
what
if this is built on residential zoning, and we're talking about a residential
Well, right
question.
now, that says no building on residential property. That's part of the problem Mr. Cirque mentioned,
Right.
which I think
it
is
eliminates.
But-
is
that
good
and-
for now.
But even if you look at another zone, at some point it does abut a residential district,
Right.
so.
So, I mean, I think the setback of 50 feet is far too inadequate.
Well, you might want to consider the zoning regulations as to whether or not the solar field has a greater impact than any other commercial or industrial use, because these are the setbacks you have right now
Mhm,
for all industrial and commercial uses.
mhm.
For solar, we change it, no?
But solar panels, feasibly, they're not putting up a solar field on an acre site, but you're gonna get industrial property on an acre site. They're gonna wanna use multiple acres, 50 acres, 30 acres. So having a setback of hundreds of feet is not unreasonable.
How would you want to judge the
Well-
amount of setback?
Well, first off, is 3 acres reasonable? I thought to be a minimally viable site, you had to have at least 5 acres of panels.
We have, Squirrel Island Road is 4.7 acres cleared. And 60 Tyhonet, which is an ADM, an AD Makepeace project, is 4.3 acres, which is fenced.
Mhm.
And that's 1.1 megawatt.
Okay, so, all right, and would you say anything like that, anything less than that is not allowed? Is a small, Ground-mounted solar?
The size of the regulator is 0.25 megawatts under this.
but the
zoning
the
bylaw.
bylaw affects large ground-mounted solar, which you define as 3 acres and up.
Right, 3 acres and up and 0.25 megawatts.
Have
and
you,
up.
have you suggested
Can they put these? Can they put
addressing anything under 3 acres ground-mounted?
No, this doesn't identify that as.
I think that's something we need to identify, because that is something that could show up in somebody's backyard in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah,
I don't want the panels on my roof, because I just shingled it, so I'm gonna put them out in my yard and let my neighbors look at
Can
them.
these be
you know?
built
Bylaw
over
says that-
cranberry bogs? What are the
bylaw
standards
says
for
it has to
cranberry
be at
bogs?
least 3 acres or more.
To be a large ground-mounted, do we need to say something about small ground-mounted? Because I know there was a case
town
a couple of years ago where somebody wanted to put the panels basically in his backyard for his neighbor's enjoyment. And,
Being neighborly friendly.
Says an eyesore?
yeah. So that was something that I think we need to address.
That's addressed as an on-site solar energy facility
Mhm.
in this one. And their standards
That's another
Oh,
subject.
I figured.
under 594.2.
Well, I don't want you to get, oh, it's right there.
Had a gun in my head on that.
Yeah, but again, you're looking at the underlying setbacks.
Right.
I don't
So if
think,
I want to cover my whole backyard within 15 feet of the property line with solar panels.
Okay, can these be built over existing cranberry bog? That question was asked, and we never heard of applying that.
Stunts their growth.
can it be built over a cranberry bog?
It's been done, it's been done in
They,
Carver.
they can be built over fallow cranberry bogs,
Over what?
cranberry bogs that are no longer being used.
Okay,
They can be
abandoned.
used for that.
If there are people out in the bog, they still can be built
And if
over?
they are, there are places where folks have started exploring the use of, photovoltaics. They call them floating photovoltaics.
Yeah.
over bodies of water. That is in the very early stages of development. There's not a lot of that going on right now. In some places, people have been covering waterways, aqueducts with solar panels and reservoirs that actually aid in reducing evaporation.
The reason we ask that, because the majority of the agriculture you talk in this area is all cranberry bogs.
Yep.
Whether it's abandoned or whatever.
Yep.
And,
So
being
in-
a former cranberry grower myself, in the olden days, we was always told that if it was a marsh bottom or swamp bottom bog, it was always considered wetlands.
Yep.
There's bogs in Plimpton, they put them in, they were gravel pits.
Yep.
They were converted into bogs, but they were gravel bottom, so they can convert them into solar panels. You
Yeah.
probably know the project.
So there's under, and I can't remember which chapter it is on, but under DEP, you can actually, within a certain amount of years of a bog being left unused,
Yeah.
it can be used for solar, and then after a certain amount of time, it cannot. And I think it's 5 years after it being no longer used as a cranberry bog, it can be used for solar, and then after that, it cannot. We'll look it up and send you the information. But there are kind of four dimensions, I think, that may be helpful to think about when wanting to put kind of good guardrails around this stuff. One is the setbacks, right? Clearly, setbacks are helpful. But a setback is only as good as the landscaping requirements. Somebody said before, 50 feet may not be enough. 200 feet may not be enough, because it all has to do with the topography, and it has to do with what the developer is required to do to ensure that the stuff can't be seen. So the second dimension is there's setbacks. The second dimension is kind of the landscape portion, and I'm being broad in landscaping, between the use of the land, trees, and other strategies. The second one around parcel size, one of the things that's key, people are not going to develop typically on a 5-acre parcel. It's unlikely that you're going to see anything other than for use of the owner of the property, so for own consumption, just because of the way the cost structures are. Another way to think about it is with larger parcels, thinking about percentage of the parcels that could be used for these uses. And finding kind of a way of using multiple dimensions to find kind of the Goldilocks solution for each project, because for everyone it's going to be different. We talked about some that are challenges around the topography, some that are challenges around the zoning, and some are challenges around whether there were trees there before or it was a cranberry bog. So using different levers, you can actually figure out how to, regardless of what the circumstances for the property are, that the product that comes out is one that is satisfactory to the town.
What he's talking about is performance standards.
Yeah.
That would be included, that you'd say no visibility.
Right.
Zero visibility from.
You say shall not be visible from outside the property.
And
That would be a performance standard that they'd have to show.
right, and the reason I mentioned the multiple tools is, somebody could just put up a black fence. That's not a good performance standard, right? Or a
That's
fence
very
that's just
unsightly,
ugly that you
so.
can't see.
Right.
A performance standard would be one that basically retains or restores the view to what it was prior, so that you'd have to want to go over the berm, over across the wooded area to go look at the farm. There will be always someone at some point who will be able to see it. That's going to happen. I personally, I like them, but I'm in the business, and but
You drive that
On your
Maserati,
backyard.
You could,
I actually have on my roof, and I also subscribe to the facility in Dover. So I kind of vote with my actions and with my business. I think this stuff is good, but
could you suggest like a 500-foot buffer with the ability to decrease it with the proper screening?
Vegetation, berming.
yeah. What I'm wondering about 500, and I'm not an engineer, but just the math on it. If you have a parcel and you have 500 feet on every side, you'd have to have a massive parcel to have anything happen small in the middle.
Well, I'm thinking 500 from a residential use, say, a residential zone.
So that's actually, some of the things that we've encountered at times and has
Mhm.
been a constructive use is, rather than thinking necessarily about the property boundary of the where you're actually building the facility, who are the affected parties, right? Thinking about, all right, 500 feet away, there's a house. What do I need to do? Or 200 feet away, there's a house. What do we need to do? Or, a 3-level apartment building or something like that. What do we need to do to make sure that their experience with the neighborhood is no worse off? So, and that's where the berms and the trees, not, trees, but actual trees and cutting whatever is necessary comes into play.
But you also have to make sure that if there's another possibility of a structure between the existing
Yeah,
house, that's not diminished.
My concern is not what's there today, but once your facility's in place, how will it adversely or positively affect the property that is not developed that's near your project? That's what I worry about, because my opinion is once your project goes in, market values go down. I mean, you can tell me the opposite, but I buy a lot of real estate, and I'll pay less for something near one of your facilities. I won't pay the market share. So my concern is for those neighbors that you're going to adversely affect the day you dig your first hole, but also the people that own the 50 acres down the road that's natural today, but their goal was at some point, because it's been approved for a 10-lot subdivision for their retirement, not yours. How will they develop their project now that your facility's there? And it's a bit of a burden. It's affected them negatively. So that's how I look at it, not what's there today. That's a concern for the construction phase. My concern is what's not there today, and that's what's going to adversely affect the residents of this town and the town. So that's why right now, I strongly support that no solar projects be built in any residential zone properties until we get a perfect handle on this for the future.
Just a suggestion, also, we found it's useful in other towns where we can provide, visual renderings of what the project would look like. I found that's useful, and also to your point, we've had landowners in the past that have undeveloped sites, nearby our sites request visual buffering, which seems silly when there's nothing there, but, always willing to work with those neighbors for any developments they might have down the road.
Right.
Because I hear your concerns. We're not planning you can plan for what's there today and what can reasonably be expected to happen in the future. And it's one of the reasons that I think the two larger types of parcel zoning areas are probably the most suitable, because they're the type that are typically going to be used or had been used or remain in agriculture, which is typically the places where you would want to do this, rather than in zones where the next best use may be a small farm, small 50-acre or 30-acre farm that shuts down, and then they want to put in a small subdivision. Because, listen, I hear you, and the impact, there's some studies that have been carried out on the impact of solar on properties. It's still early days. I cannot sit here and tell you the property value goes up or the property value goes down. I think there are a lot of factors.
Yeah.
And the data, some reports that are out from the National Renewable Energy Lab show that the property values actually increase.
Well, I would think that if I had 50 acres of industrial property in Wareham right now, and you put a solar farm on that the properties around it would increase, because it's a much better use than a factory. And so I can see that. But what we're talking about now, per Mr. Cirque's comments, is the residential zoning, and my opinion is we protect that until we have a plan in place that protects the town, because we have seen a real negative impact to your friendly competitors who have already come to the town and taken advantage of us. And the Zoning Board of Appeals, sadly, didn't have the tools and equipment to do the job they needed to do. So I would rather see our town planner put that in place now to protect the town until we have a plan in place that will address all of the concerns for the town, and then we can open it up to other projects like yours.
If I could just respond to that, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Sure.
I think, respectfully, the better alternative would be to work between now and the Springtown meeting on crafting a bylaw that is more focused than the bylaw that you're looking at on the screen now.
Yeah.
And I say that partly because the fact is that if you're going to proceed with this bylaw, which bans it in all residential districts, the response, unfortunately, is going to be that landowners who feel that they would be barred from this use in residential zones will submit A&R plans to you between now and the date of town meeting to freeze the use of the land for 3 years. And that would be that they could then utilize the current bylaw, which is silent on solar, for up to 3 years from the date of endorsement of that plan, as Mr. Rowley will attest to. So in insisting on this kind of a bylaw, which would prohibit all large ground-mounted solar in residential, you may end up, ironically and perversely, encouraging what you are trying to limit and prohibit, because people can use the state law to grandfather their uses for 3 years. And so I'd rather suggest that you spend the time with the cooperation of people on this side of the table to come up with a more focused scalpel than something that is a blunderbuss and might blow up in your face.
The problem is, this town doesn't put together plans all that complete in a short time period. So even to wait till the spring, I think would not be enough time for a proper plan for the town. And I know what you're saying about people bringing in plans in advance. But I think based on what I've seen so far in the town, that there would be some pushback from the selectmen, town council, based on our previous experiences. So those applicants that do that probably will see a much different face than they've seen in the past.
How can a person who submits an approval not required plan not get it endorsed if it's entitled to be endorsed?
I don't know, you're an attorney, I wouldn't know.
Just some technical points.
Yeah.
Where this is the public hearing for these proposed zoning bylaws, how much change can be allowed at this point without calling for another special public hearing between now and town meeting?
I don't know what your warrant article says, but I assume it's phrased generally, and so it allows...
Want to read it? It's here.
Oh, okay. Which article is it?
It's right in the front.
Oh, okay.
You know what we're gonna do? I think we should go up,
Oh,
back off, and go trenches and work on this.
it's phrased very generally.
But then it
It's
has,
basically a placeholder?
it's a placeholder, but then it has description in the next
Yeah,
page
to
now.
see if the town will vote to... Oh, let's see. Oh, and then it, okay.
Yeah, so that might be,
It,
that's probably going to be an
But
issue.
the text of the actual bylaw probably has to be in place before the warrant's printed, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question for Rich Bowen, you know, in terms of to what extent
The warrant closes September, 30 days prior to town meeting, right, legally?
George, suggested, think we should, we know what we're gonna do. Why don't we go do our homework and we'll come back to this issue. We'll continue it. Because all we're doing now is we're ruffling each other's feathers, getting irritated.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. We either try to
We're not
make
gonna put the
corrections in
detriment.
this
It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna work.
prior to the warrant closing.
Well, you have your public hearing that you've had today. You have, basically, usually what happens is you go back and you modify the article where it's necessary.
Right, we don't have to close the public hearing. We just continue it to the next meeting. Let's gather some more information, Ken can do some more digging, and try to do some intelligent. Otherwise, we're gonna be shooting each other in the parking lot.
What would be the downside of recommending approval on the bylaw the way it's been written for this town meeting, knowing that it's simply stopgap, and use it as the basis for leap forward into something which can always be modified and upgraded and changed at a later date?
Can I answer that?
At least you get something in place, and you can always go back. I can't tell you how many times I've seen modifications to bylaws that are already written to improve it. So what would be the downside of doing this the way that it's written right now, with the understanding that you're gonna continue to work on it with Rich and his group to come up with something which is better,
It's
But
going to
is
generate an A and R
at
plan.
least better than what we have now?
Just what Attorney Cirque had illustrated, that it's gonna generate freeze plans.
Yeah.
But I would think that would be limited
That's negative.
to your
That's-
large
that's negative
land
effort
tracts.
there.
I mean, we went through that with the zoning rewrite.
We went through that a long time ago, George. Mr. Cirque, I think he was involved with that, going way, way back. You know, we went with freeze plans. Your predecessor came in with a bunch of plans that choked a horse, tried to do a freeze.
The number of
way
people
back.
that would
always
actually,
happens. That always happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, let's we can act like professionals here. Right, Ken?
As I look at this language, though,
Say something,
it says to see if the town will enact the following amendments to the zoning bylaws, and it lays them out literally. So I thought the article was going to be generally worded so that you'd have the flexibility of tweaking it between now and town meeting.
Not there.
This is worded pretty specifically, so I'm not sure that you can.
That's my fear, that you would have to hold another public hearing.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have time for it.
And has the warrant closed for the fall town meeting? I thought it had.
Warrant closes, I believe we close it tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
selectmen's meeting.
So
So they can't add any
I'm not,
after that.
the way this is worded,
Ken?
it's fixed on what's on the screen, and so I'm not sure you can amend it.
Well, you'd have to do substantial on-the-floor amendments, which
Well, the
would be a
question-
nightmare.
The question
The
is,
audience would just give up and throw you out of the room.
I don't think you can.
yeah, I mean, this is,
It substantially changes the tenor of what's in the bylaw. I don't think you can do it on the floor.
Yeah, if you were gonna take all the areas and say no, and then change them, a majority of them to yes, I believe that's outside the scope of the article,
you know,
unless,
And-
unless Claire has a very liberal.
I thought the article would have been
Interpretation.
worded to see if the town will enact a bylaw that would regulate the placement of ground-mounted solar and on-site solar.
But it requires the description. So the problem is that what you have there is kind of locked in.
Yeah.
And the only drawback you have is you pass something like this, then you go to town meeting 6 months later, what if town meeting votes no on the changes?
Well, I think that's, I mean, I think the specificity of this language is another reason why you ought to wait until the spring, until you have something that, with the cooperation of people, again, on both sides, working with Mr. Rowley, Mr. Buckland, and a subcommittee of your board, to come up with something that you feel is ready for prime time.
Town council.
You okay? What was
This
that?
is haunted weird.
I'll fall over, Mike.
Like your teeth fell out.
What is your wish list for your project right now? What is your time frame for your project? Is it 2017 initiative, 2018 initiative?
18.
18, mid-year?
It depends. I mean,
Was that,
a lot of, so the timing on these projects depends on the utility, it depends on the weather, and it depends on the process within the town for getting them permitted.
was that plan you put in, was that a submittal, or was that?
I,
Which plan? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Which plan?
The plan that was submitted for,
The pre-permitting hearing meeting?
is that what that was? Okay.
Yes. So we're
So does-
preparing permit applications now.
So does that constitute a submittal that would be grandfathered regardless of this act?
Under the state law, if this bylaw is enacted by town meeting, it governs any building permit or any special permit that was approved after the date of the first advertisement for this public hearing, the one we're having tonight. So
If it's approved by the attorney.
anything that they submitted tomorrow would be governed by this if it passes. Do you follow me?
That's what I was getting at. What they put forward does not represent a submittal. It's just a...
They haven't submitted yet. But if they submitted tomorrow, it would be governed by this if it passes.
But that's where I was going with it.
Right. And that's why, since they want to go forward, if this is approved for passage, if the board votes to support this at town meeting, the landowner will file an A&R plan to freeze the zoning.
Mhm.
Freeze the uses by law.
Freeze the use. And Lexi was just mentioning to me that the text in the bylaw doesn't reflect the amendments that you made, for example, with respect to clear cutting.
Correct.
So that's not something that's within the published
Mm-hmm.
warrant for this article, because it's that specific.
Is there some more you want to run through here, Ken?
No,
While you got it up? Is there more you want to...
No, I just,
No, I'm talking
No,
to
he was
Ken.
talking to me. I think we've probably addressed this substantially in terms of the standards. The only other item that was included on here, which we didn't just talk about, was the decommissioning abandonment provisions.
Mhm.
They're also in here, which includes the idea of restoration of the sites.
Which is the language that's pretty much been attached to all the projects
Yeah,
in one form or another.
right.
Well, I would say, and I'm just taking a shot here, that because of different members having different issues with the proposed bylaw, that I would say that the board would probably recommend I want to say further study, because that's 2 years, right? On a zoning bylaw. But I would say that
Unless there are substantial changes.
they would
Right.
either, I would say they'd say either withdraw it or no action, right? At this point, is that a safe guess if I pull the board?
I think it can be worked out, but I don't think we're gonna work it out tonight. No way.
Well, I don't think we can work it out before town meeting because of the language.
But are we then opening ourselves to what Mr. Sharkey said would happen, could happen?
Well, we can contest it, that's all. Take it to court.
Yeah.
Tie it for another 5 years.
This is an
Yeah.
important decision. Charlie, what was your point about approving or accepting what is on the screen?
I think it probably was answered by the A&R question. My question was, what is the downside of approving this the way it's written right now, with the idea that you're going to continue to work on it and perhaps bring some amendments back at the Springtown meeting that would make it better?
Right.
And
Does
the
that-
answer, I think, is that if you go ahead with this and recommend it for approval now, that you may get a few A&Rs which will freeze the zoning in the residential zones as well as the other zones, that whether it's yes or no, which means that anyone then could if this passes, have 3 years in which to file an application under the current zoning.
And to avoid that,
To avoid that, put it off until the spring.
Which is, and I've probably been the one of few words this evening. As I mentioned, my name is Mark Sylvia, and I'm head of external affairs at Blue Wave. And before joining Blue Wave, I served in, I was the town manager in Plymouth and worked in state government. And from my perspective, it's very important to have this open dialogue with you. And in no way, to your point, Mr. Bautista, do we want to offend any member of the planning board, and I think it was important for us to have this dialogue because at the end of the day, as Eric said, our focus as a company is to do the right thing. And to that end, if the board decides to hold off until the spring, I think as Attorney Serkis said, you have our absolute commitment, certainly with the project that we're intending to move forward with, but more broadly, as you start to wrestle more with some of these issues, to work with you. And certainly, it wouldn't just be us, of course, because we're just one interested party, but there would be others certainly that would be useful to participate in this process to get it right. But I don't want to walk away this evening, and I hope you don't walk away with this evening with the assumption that we're just focusing on submitting an A&R, because at the end of the day, that's not what we're intending to do. We had some real concerns, particularly related to this bylaw, and we do think that we can work together on that. And as it relates to our project, you have our commitment to address issues that are clearly frustrating. I can appreciate that as a former municipal official myself. So I just wanted to say that for the record, because I think that's where we're coming from at the end of the day.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. If you support this, you get a bunch of A&Rs. If you shoot it down till spring, we'll get a bunch of applications, so.
You're gonna get an A&R as well, too, because one of the requirements of their project was to change lot lines, I understand.
Yeah, I was going to say, just in response, and I echo everything that Mark just said. One of the things about project development is that, and this 3-year window poses an opportunity for projects to be, not just for projects in development. So while a project in development may indeed file an A&R to try to freeze in response to this, it will attract the attention of other people who can then file an A&R for a potential future project. So the issue of unintended consequences, I think, is really important. And I just want to highlight, because it wouldn't be just the projects that we know of today. Collectively, it would be the projects that we don't know of that could, in essence, circumvent the intent by doing something like that. And that, that's not, I think, figuring out a way to get the right answer is probably, I think, the best outcome for everybody. For us, listen, we don't walk away from our projects. We are involved in our projects. We manage the customers for those projects. It may not be me 20 years from now. I mean, who knows, right? But we will be involved. And so that's why the partnerships are important. And we are committed to working. If you, as a board, want to solicit our thoughts or experiences or suggestions, we'll gladly bring them over and help and share some of our good experiences and some of our bad experiences. Nobody's perfect. We're not. I mean, we've made mistakes. There are always better ways of doing things.
I think the methodology going forward would be, Mr. Buckland knows who the solar providers have been in town, and you could set up meetings on a regular basis, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, where these people can be present and come in with texts of proposed bylaw amendments, and through those study committee meetings, come up with something that I think, and I hope, would meet with the approval of most people. But that's the way to do it, not at a meeting like this, and not a town meeting, that's for sure. It's got to be at a ground level, at an every 2 week or every 3 week basis, building up ultimately to a presentation at a planning board public hearing before the next town meeting. There's got to be some careful spade work.
And Ken has been trying for more input over the past few months too, but I think he's been saddled with this project on his own.
Yeah, I mean, and I think all the people involved who have built solar would be glad to be at that table.
We could just look at the existing projects and see the good and the bad, and how do you come up with a happy medium, so.
I know the people at Borrego would be welcome to do that.
Mhm.
And anybody else that you might have in mind who's been before you.
Very good. Is there anything else we got to cover? Where'd our public go? Sorry. That's the end of your presentation, right, Ken?
Yes.
Any more discussion from the board? You want to suggest a course of action, or work on this, discuss this a little more, or are we done with the public hearing process? Sounds like they want to stay here all night.
I think it
You
should
can close
remain,
the public hearing and
That's-
discuss it again.
what?
You can close the public hearing and still discuss it in a later meeting.
Entertain a motion, to close the public hearing?
I would.
Don't look at me.
So we
Hmm?
wait.
Mm-hmm.
I'll close the public hearing.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? Do I need a hand? Were you opposed to the bylaw or closing the public hearing?
Closing the public hearing.
Oh, yeah, you don't like to do that.
I don't like to do that at all. Mr. Cirque taught me that.
Thank you. Thanks,
Will you be discussing this at your next meeting, then?
I
Got to
would,
make a recommendation to town meeting.
yeah, we do. Yeah, I would say
We
at
can
that,
discuss that later.
yeah. I would say it'll be a topic for next meeting.
And that is 2 weeks from tonight?
That's correct, 2 weeks from tonight.
Just looking to see what's on the agenda. This book's getting thick. He's got signed, right?
8 point.
25th?
Is it the 25th? What else is coming up? 25th? Discovery Road, yeah, so we'll have time then.
25th, George?
25th, you'll decide
Just send it to the
what to
clerk.
recommend to town meeting.
Correct.
Send it to the clerk.
Thank you.
Thanks for your input.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You too.
We have 20 minutes of recording.
He gave me George's to sign, so I re-signed it.
We got a verbal guarantee last meeting that the executive session minutes would be acted on tonight.
Who made that agreement?
It was a fib. It's a fib.
I'm not involved.
Regarding your email, the appointing authority meeting is, the appointing authority is meeting on Thursday morning?
I don't know, they had posted that meeting, but they may have pulled it back because we didn't have the original signature on Mike's letter.
Mike's, what are you doing now, Mike?
People have been forging your name again, Mike.
What? You mean you're not gonna be here with us in this?
No. I resigned.
I believe the only applicant, or the only vote on the table is to move Mark to a full membership to replace Michael. I believe they've discussed that with you. Did you give them a letter of intent for that?
I'll issue that to them tomorrow.
Mhm.
And Claire said she needed your letter with original signature and that Thursday meeting would happen. Otherwise, I'll hold into a
Okay,
associate.
I thought she already had that. But that was the last thing I'd seen.
So you have two actions to do, one on the executive session minutes and one on the continuation, or the
Yeah, we have,
withdrawal.
we need a vote to accept the withdrawal of site plan review, special permit, and a Form C subdivision from MMDDJSAK, Patterson Brook Road.
Motion be made.
It's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? They've requested it be withdrawn without prejudice, I guess is the term?
Correct.
Do we know why?
I don't.
They haven't explained as yet.
Natural heritage delineation in that process will go back. So there may be a larger project.
The turtles
Good
moved.
DEP.
So it might be a larger project?
Well, it was when Waldo owned it. The language changed when Waldo.
All those in favor?
Right.
The only one here, Mike?
Ken was gonna buy it.
Opposed?
They shrunk it down, so he walked away.
So moved.
Now the minutes.
Yeah. I don't think Michael's prepared to do the executive session minutes.
No.
And since that would,
I did print them though,
yeah?
and I put them all together, and I put read on them.
What do you do during the day?
Nothing.
So will you come in on the 25th, and as your final act as a member, just,
That's my last.
I make a motion that we fire the custodian?
Huh?
Go home early tonight.
No, I gotta come back at 5 in the morning to open up.
so he's not spending the night?
I could do that.
Can I ask, between now and 2 weeks from now, how is this discussion going to continue? I mean, we're not going to be moving off center and voting for this? Are we going to
In
comment on that?
2 weeks, you can review the text of the proposed bylaw, and we'll make a decision whether we're going to support it, recommend, I don't want to say further study, but we're going to give a report to town meeting as to what action should be taken.
Modify what's written right now, right?
I think you can
We
make
can make small modifications.
small modifications, but a wholesale rewrite can't be done without
Well,
another.
what is a small modification? If the setback is saying 50, can we say 200? Is that considered a minor or major
I think if
modification?
we get to fine points, then it'll be up to the moderator or town council as to,
If it's a substantive change that changes the intent that was in the paper. Just a public saw.
mhm.
Just
That's a
working
major
too much.
change that can't come out. That's what I've always been told.
Yeah. I think it's probably the umpire on that will be the moderator as to,
I think what I can do is contact the Blue Wave, find out specifically what they recommend in terms of the bylaw changes. We only heard the use allowance and the clear cutting tonight.
well, they also objected to it not being allowed in the R130 and 60s.
Right.
Attorney Shirkey brought that out, that's basically where they put these things. And basically, the law, as proposed, they're saying it's a reverse posting, so to speak. You can't do it anywhere. It's allowed, but you can't do it anywhere.
Right.
It's like adult entertainment.
What, is there any of, out of these 8 that exist now, is there another vendor that we can call in here to listen in on the conversation? That we have a relationship with? I mean, who did the Wareham Fire District? Is that someone the town hired,
I
or?
think that was Borrego. I think Borrego did a couple of the
They did
make-piece
make
ones.
pieces.
Not all of them, though.
No, they did the big one, though.
I don't know, I don't remember who did that one on County Road that was, I mean, we objected to it more than the neighbors did because they just looked at it as not having a 6-lot subdivision behind them.
You definitely want to talk to people from Hathaway.
You might want to talk to them because you can see.
Yeah, well, that was the reason, Hathaway was the reason why we were pushing the solar bylaw, trying to get something through.
So, I would feel more comfortable if there was a little diversity in the room here, to see whether a second, even a third company agrees or disagrees with the recommendations to the changes of the bylaw. And I'm a little, if we don't pass this, it kicks back to a 3-year grandfather clause.
No, there's no standards now, except the state law says you can build one by special permit.
But we still have to approve the special permit.
No, zoning board.
ZBA does.
Why did that change, by the way? Why did that change?
There's no solar bylaw.
Oh, they originally came to us for the first couple solar.
Because you, to ask you your opinion, but that's all.
Then we have the ability to,
They could file a perimeter plan for the property that they propose to put this on, which freezes the use, not the density, but it freezes the use for a 3-year period.
Not the dimensional standards either.
The only thing that will be frozen would be the use of the property, which would be an allowed use under the present bylaw. Oh, I can't hear you.
okay.
Charlie's losing his voice, Bob.
I moved my mic back, Bob.
It would freeze the use, meaning that if it is a residentially zoned, then that, it freezes at residentially zoned, but they can go to the zoning
But-
board of appeals.
Correct.
It's a
Ask for a special permit.
It's a special permit now. It would be a special permit for 3 years.
But they also made it sound like they'd walk through and get whatever they want. The reality is ZBA, along with town council and the selectmen, do have some say. And as much as Mr. Cirque doesn't admit to that, I firmly believe that the town could control that project to the point where they might not want to build it, or the town could delay that project long enough so that tax credits change, so they won't want to build it. So Mr. Cirque is fully aware of what the possibilities are.
So you're thinking it's most favorable for them, the audience that was sitting in front of us today, to see this approved and be able to work under these conditions with minor alterations.
He's gonna look under every crack he can to get what he wants.
Well, by the same token, they could get a 3-year extension, but if the subsidies dry out, these guys are all gonna evaporate
They
anyway.
disappear. And the subsidies are changing after 2017. I don't know how, but I know they're changing, and they're gonna change again at the end of 2018.
Right now, roof solar's gone down the poppers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a 40% reduction in incentives
What's that?
for residential roof solar projects now, starting January 1st.
Well,
Oh,
they
no,
changed
sorry,
their
March.
emphasis.
The large-scale projects have already lost a whole bunch of their credits this past year.
Yeah, so,
There's gonna be a whole new set of rules.
One thing to
coming.
remember under the application process right now, that
how big is the project?
if nothing is done and it goes through a filing the way that it sits right now, it goes to the ZBA. Because it's site plan special permit, you get to make comments to the Board of Appeals on that project. So there's no reason why you can't be involved in that process, and from the
We-
ones I've seen.
we
it's
haven't been in
a
the-
lousy one.
Yeah, but we haven't been involved in the last 5 of them.
Well, whose
No.
fault is that?
I don't know. Who's supposed to?
It's a site plan review recommendation that gets made to the Board of Appeals by your board.
But if we don't know about the project, no one ever notified me that there was a project.
Well, I can't speak for that. All I can tell you is what the process is. And of the 8 projects that have been approved and are under construction, there's been one that's been not so good. Just 1 out of 8.
Your opinion.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Because I've been out there to see them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason why, in the meantime, something similar could not work in the proper location. And what I'm suggesting is that from the discussion you've had tonight and the concerns that you've all voiced tonight, there's no reason why you can't be involved in that process. There's a recommendation to the Board of Appeals. And you're working on the bylaw in the meantime.
So any major adjustments to the bylaw needs to be approved at town meeting. Right. So we really want to make sure that we're presenting at town meeting our best work.
Well, major changes on the town meeting floor are pretty difficult. They don't go through very often.
You can't make wholesale changes on town meeting.
If you have this, the kind of discussion we had here tonight on town meeting floor, it's not passing.
Yeah.
So we need to be, this board needs to be comfortable with what it's putting forward and be able to defend it, which I don't think we're comfortable. I think everybody has a little something in there that they'd like to see a little different.
Yeah, I think our money is better, our time is better spent going the way Charlie just recommended, is just take our time to work on this, let it go to zoning board of appeals, and then sit in with our opinion with the zoning board of appeals.
Copy of it's supposed to come here for an evaluation under site plan review, and you make recommendations to the board. They get written up. You might have to press the Board of Appeals to incorporate them into their decision. I sit with that board from time to time if I have a project that goes before them. Sometimes you have to prod them a little bit to get them to recognize what you put in writing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an important issue, so I would think you'd want to.
It was important in the last 5 projects, but we didn't see those.
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I know, but I'm just saying,
It's not my job to know that.
who has the answers for that? Why did we not see them?
I don't know.
You did see 460 County Road, and you did make recommendations to the Board of Appeals.
Yes, that one.
We saw Square Island, didn't we? I mean, or I guess that was after the fact. Bob Perry was here,
Yeah, after the fact.
the project was already done when he was here.
He changed the lot lines, but I think there was a, did we make recommendations on that? I don't remember. I know he was before us or something. And I don't know what happened with Dobie Road. I don't know what.
Or Hathaway.
Hmm?
I don't think we saw
Hathaway came in front of us. But the developer there went in and mowed down all the buffers. And that's why I say there should be a provision in there that you don't sink a pole in the ground till the buffers are in place.
I think we gave input to the Board of Appeals on Hathaway Road, but it went on deaf ears, as they said. Yeah, like you said, the developer. I think if we're cautious with this, Mark, I think we can work through this. We got no choice. As far as the idle threats and all that stuff, Mr. Cirque's known for doing that. I mean, he's given us extensions and revoked them the next day. Like I said, that's his job.
I mean, the reality is, there's only probably 2 people that are gonna file for freeze plan. This project and ADM probably will.
Right.
Nobody else has the resources or the, to do that.
Do we know how big this project is?
This one, yeah, that was
It's on the
posted.
list. It's
Project's
3
12
separate sites.
12 megawatts, and it's 40 acres.
40 acres. And are they cleared now?
So they're gonna clear cut it, they're gonna remove all the sand.
Are the 40
Like they did
acres
with all the
currently
others.
clear?
They're gonna disappear out of town. That's another issue.
I don't know the current status on the underlying property. Whether it's cleared or not.
Doesn't say, just list the, who owns the
I'm sorry, I
property.
gotta recap this again.
Can't read this.
Unless they bring us something overly compelling next meeting, I don't think we're gonna push this through, right? Is that where we're leaning right now?
That's
It's a couple of pounds.
the way I'm thinking, because, we got
Road that is.
5 different opinions as to what
Yeah.
that should say.
Yeah, so
That's
not that
fine.
I'm any influence in this final decision
That's
right now
fine,
because of
Road.
the status I'm in, but can we get somebody other than this Blue Wave here to talk to us?
Yes, we can get one of the other, Borrego Systems may be the most appropriate one to contact.
Right.
Peter Beaton,
So, I
the
mean, if
project
we
they
just
did.
be respectful of their time and let them
it's a coincidence, he just bought some
No.
more from Makepeace.
listen in without drawing it out 3 hours.
Yeah,
I don't think we need to draw it out 3 hours again.
3 pounds.
We reviewed the major
That's why,
points.
that's why they wanted to put the wind towers on.
And is that company the one that did the one at 418 County?
This is 418.
no, that wasn't
At
the one.
the Winter
That's the
Sand Pit?
subdivision plan one.
Yeah,
418 County Road was
Any residential stuff there? or-
APE, Power and Electric or something, Power and Energy.
In my opinion, they did the best job of the site development or the plan that they ultimately ended up with.
And that's the one that worried us the most, because they were really close to the property.
They worked with the property owners that were next to them on that,
Mhm.
to get buffers in, and they did some extra things on the benefit of one of them.
And the thing is,
The contractor on that was outstanding, I thought. Much better than some others I've seen. But they're not necessarily the owner.
Contract is necessarily the
That's right.
the
Not
designer.
necessarily the owner.
No, we're not.
Yeah,
But even the owner, when I did meet him on site and everything, and they discussed with me, there were never any issues. They
But
asked
on
me about-
paper, that did not look like a good plan. They were using every inch of that, right up to the, 20-foot setback and
Yeah, well.
right in
yeah,
people's backyards.
Yeah.
There
but-
was an elevation difference because it was a sand pit.
Yeah, and the owners of the property there made it quite known to the Board of
See him stand
Appeals
up to anything yet?
that they'd much rather see that.
Have you seen the quality of our submissions
Subdivision.
improve yet?
That was the
We still
point.
getting shit
They'd
on
rather see
submissions?
that quiet the way it is now
The one
without,
that reviews
Said
them,
the
it's
deer
right there.
can run through the panels and no problem at all, because they do it now.
jump the fence.
Yeah,
Should we stay, to adjourn?
One quick question. What about a design review, a committee to put this thing together, or to help put this thing together?
Design review for this or for the other?
No, for the, what Kent put, for the zoning, for the bylaw, for the spring meeting. How will it happen? Do you do it alone, Ken, or do?
no, I think what we can do is we can have regular scheduled items on the agenda for the planning board, and I can do it with the whole board. We can go through the
During
changes.
board meetings or another?
During regular board meetings, we can do that.
Well, Attorney Serkis suggested a subcommittee with,
You could do that if you wanted to as
we
well.
could get collect some input from them, which I think would,
For my side, I'm totally ignorant. I mean, I don't know what I'm voting on. I don't know what the consequence of this is going to be. We somehow, to get to some.
You could get 2 members of the board, and then you could call in some of these people to talk to, and then report back.
Use your mics, guys.
I thought they closed right. You could have up to 2 members of the board, and those members could meet with different companies, get the information, bring it back to the board each meeting or whenever to discuss it, and then go through it, and they could, it's how we did the sign bylaw, remember, George, and the TDR? We had certain people come that wasn't a quorum, brought it back, and then it was discussed and changed. I mean, you could have 2 members here, Charlie could be there, you could have Blue Wave and somebody else, and it's not an official meeting, it's a subcommittee meeting. You don't have to worry about a quorum.
We could meet in your office once a week or every
I
couple
think
of
it
weeks.
might
Ken?
be,
I mean,
probably a good step would be take the plans from the ones we already have and see what we like and don't like about them.
A lot of things you can do, whatever you want.
Because I think we've got a pretty good array of,
Yeah, we have all the
no
files.
pun intended.
Yeah. Good solar array. All right, so we'll do a subcommittee.
Mhm.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
Let me see if we've got everything covered here. Unless you want to make a motion to approve the executive session minutes, so.
Second, if I make the motion. Make a motion to accept the minutes for all the executive minutes for February 23rd, March 28th, April 27th, 2016, as written.
I gotta check your dates.
Trust me, they're right here.
Yep.
Jasmine's been putting those down every meeting for the last 6 months.
And you, Michael, and myself were the only ones present tonight that were here for those, right? How'd that happen?
I don't know.
No, you weren't here for the March 28th one.
I reviewed the tape.
But I think we're gonna have to vote for it out of necessity, because after tonight, I'll be the only one here. Motion's been made and seconded to, let's take them one at a time. Approve the minutes of March 28th, which Michael and myself are the only ones present. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we got what, 1, 2, well, you weren't here, 3 exceptions. That's it. Next is February 23rd. Yeah, went backwards, sorry. February 23rd. Both Michaels and myself were here for that. Motion?
Motion to accept minutes as read for February 23rd.
Second.
Executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And finally, April 27th, 2016. Again, the three of us.
Motion to accept the minutes for April 27th, 2016.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Very good.
Entertain a
Thank you very
motion to
much.
adjourn.
And the chair's determined that these minutes are no longer subject to the restriction of executive session. If I could have done that first, we could. Motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Before we adjourn, I would like to thank Michael Fitzgerald for his services he's given us these past few years. Wait anxiously for his return.
That's it, spring.
He missed that.
I got it.
You can stay on.
All in favor?
Aye.
Uh, Opposed?
Any progress at all? Ken, did you
Meeting
get my-
adjourned at, is that 11 o'clock? Holy mackerel.
Winter's Lane?
Yes. I own Winter's Lane.
Did I return that Sunday?